Chapter 157. Lord Shu's mood was also very complicated. Anyone whose daughter had committed a crime would not feel good to see the person who caused it speak as if no one else was present. But he could not say anything. His daughter made the mistake first. He could not blame His Majesty for it, and he did not dare to. Shang Junlin had a reputation, and all the officials were afraid of him, especially officials like Lord Shu who had been working outside the capital and had only heard about His Majesty's actions from others. It was not a secret that Shang Junlin used bloody means to force the previous emperor to abdicate. Lord Shu had been working outside for many years, but it did not mean that he did not have any connections in the capital. Otherwise, he would not have been transferred back to the capital this time. As an official, who did not want to stay in the center of power? In comparison, Madame Shu was not so afraid of Shang Junlin. She was a woman and had been doted on by her family since she was young. After she got married, her husband also listened to her. It could be said that her life had been smooth sailing and she had not encountered any setbacks. Until today. Knowing his wife's temperament, Lord Shu pulled her sleeve and whispered, "That is His Majesty and Gui Jun." As they spoke, they got closer and closer. "Greetings, Your Majesty and Gui Jun." Lord Shu knelt down and saluted. Madame Shu followed suit. Shang Junlin looked at them from above for a while. Just as Lord Shu's back was faintly covered in cold sweat, he spoke. "Rise." Lord Shu hurriedly pulled his wife up and watched Shang Junlin and Shen Yu leave. "The person walking with His Majesty is Gui Jun? Does His Majesty dote on him a lot?" Madame Shu looked at the backs of the two people leaving. "Yes." Before he entered the palace, His Majesty gave him the title of Gui Jun. After entering the palace, he was doted on even more. His Majesty even announced to the public that he would only have Gui Jun in his life. Lord Shu sighed. Gui Jun is a man. Won't the officials object to His Majesty's words? How can they not object? Who doesn't want to send their daughter to the palace to fight for a future? But what's the use of objecting? His Majesty has decided that he only wants Gui Jun and has punished several officials for this. In order to divert Madame Shu's attention and dispel some thoughts in her heart, Lord Shu deliberately said a few more words. "Really?" Retracting her gaze, Mrs. Shu changed the topic. "Do you have a way to contact Hanju City in the shortest time possible? Why are you contacting them? Don't worry, even if His Majesty sends someone to investigate, they won't find anything." After the initial panic, Lord Shu was no longer as panicked as before. No matter what, he had been in Hanju for a long time, and everyone there was his people. So what if His Majesty sent officials to investigate? If they could find anything, how could he be transferred to the capital? What should we do about Junjun? Madame Shu's heart ached at the thought of her daughter. "I'll think of a way to deal with Junjun." Lord Shu patted Madame Shu's hand. Before the imperial edict was officially announced, some officials came over to greet Lord Shu. Lord Shu didn't dare to reveal anything, so he pretended to be happy and chatted with the officials. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin first went to the place where the game was piled up. They had a good harvest from this trip. There were rabbits, roe deer, all kinds of game. "What else does a Yu want to eat besides deer meat?" "Roasted rabbit." Shen Yu pointed out a few things, which the palace servants took away. After they were done, they only needed to roast the meat. It was bustling outside. People were constantly returning from the three forests with their game. They were in groups of 2 or 3 as they complemented each other. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin held hands as they walked on the grass. They didn't go to crowded places, and no one would disturb them. It was late autumn, and the temperature was low at night. Shen Yu wore a cloak, but he could still feel the chill seeping in. Shang Junlin touched Shen Yu's hand, which was getting colder, and gave up on the idea of walking out. Approaching the bonfire, Shen Yu couldn't help wanting to get closer to the bonfire. The competition would last for 3 days, and it was only the first day. After the people in charge of counting the game, everyone could gather and enjoy the delicacies they hunted during the day. The palace servants served the processed meat. Shen Yu supported his chin with one hand as he looked at the man's handsome side profile. The fire jumped, and the man who was seriously roasting the meat had a touch of smoke. It was hard to imagine that the hands used to hold a brush and kill enemies could be used to do something so down-to-earth. Shang Junlin skillfully roasted the meat. After a while, the meat slices made a sizzling sound, and a strong aroma wafted out. Shun Yu's nose twitched, and his eyes fell on Shang Junlin's hand. It smells so good. Are you hungry? It'll be ready in a while. The aroma was getting stronger. Shang Junlin put the roasted meat on a plate and handed it to Shun Yu. Try it. After drying for a while, Shun Yu was sure that the meat was not so hot. He picked up a piece and put it into his mouth. He chewed it quickly and swallowed it. Shun Yu ate the whole piece of meat and said in surprise, "Your Majesty's cooking is really beyond my expectations. It's so delicious." Shun Yu asked Shang Junlin to roast the meat for him simply because he wanted to eat the meat roasted by Shang Junlin. If he could swallow it, he could praise it with his eyes closed. Who knew that the meat roasted by Shang Junlin was so delicious? He didn't know how to praise it. Seeing that Shun Yu liked it, Shang Junlin roasted a few more pieces. Different types of meat tasted different. The only thing they had in common was how delicious they were. Shun Yu was originally a person who liked good food. He accidentally ate too much and felt a little uncomfortable. They roasted more than half of the venison and several rabbits. Shang Junlin roasted most of it himself, and some of it went into Shun Yu's stomach. Some of it was roasted by the palace servants, and some went into Shang Junlin's stomach. Shun Yu also roasted the meat a few times. The first time, the meat was burnt. The second time, the meat was not cooked. After several failures, Shun Yu gave up. Shun Yu rubbed his stomach and looked at the unfinished roasted meat. He was in a dilemma. There is still so much left to eat. Even if the weather was cold, the meat would not be fresh until tomorrow. Give some to the palace servants and some to the ministers. That should be enough, Shang Junlin said. After receiving the order, the palace servants distributed the roasted meat. The Prime Minister, Fang Daran, and other ministers who were highly regarded by Shang Junlin could all get a share. Roasted meat was nothing, but it symbolized the importance of the emperor to his ministers. Let's not talk about the thoughts of those who received the roasted meat and those who didn't. Shun Yu ate the meat roasted by Shang Junlin. The price was that he had to go outside to digest the food at night. If I don't look after you, you will feel more uncomfortable now. Shang Junlin put one arm around Shun Yu's waist to support his weight. His tone was somewhat helpless. The meat roasted by Your Majesty is not something that can be eaten casually, Shun Yu said while savoring the aftertaste. If it was not so delicious, he would not have eaten so much. Deer meat and deer blood are very nutritious. I will ask Imperial Physician Ji Yu to prescribe some medicine to clear the heat in your body. Shang Junlin was very happy that the food he cooked was liked by his lover. Shun Yu thought of this in hindsight and widened his eyes. How much did I eat just now? Shang Junlin calculated and gave the answer, quite a lot. Compared to other kinds of meat, you obviously prefer deer meat. Shun Yu would indeed choose what he liked to eat more when he ate. He thought about it. It seemed that, probably, he really ate a lot. No wonder I feel so warm now. I am not cold at all. Shun Yu felt that even if the wind blew, he would not feel cold. What about Your Majesty? Did Your Majesty eat a lot of deer meat just now? Shun Yu stopped. I am not picky about meat. Let's see what meat you put in my bowl. Shang Junlin was responsible for roasting the meat for Shun Yu. When Shun Yu ate, he did not forget Shang Junlin. Half of the meat was in his mouth, and the other half was in Shang Junlin's mouth. Shang Junlin had a big appetite. Shun Yu wanted to roast the meat for him. However, the meat he roasted was a failure. He could only ask the palace servants to roast the meat and then feed it to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin was very easy to serve when it came to food. Basically, he ate whatever Shun Yu fed him. Your Majesty also drank deer blood. Shun Yu thought about the possible consequences of drinking deer meat and deer blood. Let's walk outside before going back. If he had known, he would not have been so greedy. Shun Yu did not want to have to stay in the tent because of various reasons on the second day of the autumn hunt. With Shang Junlin's physical strength and the effect of deer blood, Shun Yu did not dare to think about the consequences. We have to wait until you are not so full before going back to rest. Shang Junlin did not express his opinion. The sky was completely dark. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin walked behind the tent. On the other side, the ministers gathered with their families around the bonfire. The gap between their identities was not as obvious as usual. It was a rare opportunity to relax. The ministers no longer talked about government affairs. Instead, they talked about what they had seen and heard during the day, about the game each family had hunted, or about finding a partner for their children. The young people who performed well in the autumn hunt could not only leave a good impression in front of the emperor, but also obtain a good marriage. Shu Daran and Madame Shu originally wanted to use this opportunity to find a good husband for their daughter. Now, not to mention their daughter, even their own ability to stay in the capital was a problem. Naturally, they did not have this thought. Madame Shu did not show any abnormality and chatted with the other madams warmly. The night gradually grew late. After everyone finished eating and drinking, they went back to rest. Shu Daran turned his head and did not find his wife. He was about to send someone to look for her when he saw Madame Shu hurriedly walk over. "Where did you go?" "I just drank wine and felt a bit stuffy. I went to a place with fewer people to get some fresh air." Shu Daran did not suspect her. "The banquet is over. Let's go back and rest." "Okay." Madame Shu was relieved that he did not suspect her. After Shen Yu digested the food, he went back to the tent with Shang Junlin. He was worried that the man would take the opportunity to do something. He did not expect that Shang Junlin would behave himself until he fell asleep. He did not cross the line at all. Shen Yu did not feel anything wrong with his body. He finally relaxed and slowly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by the heat. It was as if he had been thrown into a furnace. He felt hot from the inside out. Shen Yu pulled his clothes and lifted the quilt. His movements were not small. Shang Junlin noticed that something was wrong almost as soon as he began to move. His arm was originally placed on the young man's waist, but the young man impatiently pushed it away because of the heat. His clothes were opened, but the heat did not subside. Instead, it became more and more intense. Shen Yu struggled to open his eyes. He only felt that he had fallen from one illusion to another. "Are you?" Shen Yu grabbed the man's outstretched hand. The heat was relieved. As if he had been inspired, he chased the man's arm and rubbed against the man's chest. He heard the man's slightly smiling voice above his head, "You took the initiative to throw yourself into my arms. After you wake up, gooder you can't blame me." Chapter 158. The next day, Shen Yu was unable to get up, just as he had initially feared. After waking up, Shen Yu wanted to sit up, but when he moved, he pulled on a certain part of his body. It was so painful that he softly hissed and fell back down. His entire body was aching from every part of his body. Shen Yu lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling with a somewhat listless gaze. Although a large part of the reason for last night was because of him, Shen Yu was still not very happy. No matter how he thought about it, Shang Junlin was waiting for him, and he was the rabbit that delivered itself to his door. The movements on the bed were heard outside. After a while, Shang Junlin walked in. Behind him were two palace maids, each holding something in their hands. As soon as the steaming hot food came in, Shen Yu smelled the aroma floating out. His single stomach unconsciously made a rumbling sound. Shang Junlin walked to the bedside. The palace maids put down the things in their hands and quietly retreated. "Did your majesty do it on purpose last night?" Shen Yu asked in a hoarse voice. "Jin didn't do anything last night," Shang Junlin complained for himself. "A Yu took the initiative to throw himself into my arms. Jin couldn't possibly reject a Yu." Shen Yu was helped to sit up. His body was very dry. It seemed that the man had washed him. "Drink some water first." Shang Junlin brought the warm water to Shen Yu's mouth. Shen Yu lowered his head and drank the water from Shang Junlin's hand. His throat finally felt a little better and his voice was not as hoarse as before. "Did your majesty deliberately let me eat so much venison?" Shen Yu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. At this moment, Shen Yu's face was still red and the corners of his eyes were red. When he looked over, it only made Shang Junlin more excited. Shang Junlin shifted his legs and said without batting an eyelid, Shen also roasted other meat. It was a Yu who had a special liking for venison. Of course, Shang Junlin wouldn't tell Shen Yu that before feeding him, he had specifically asked Imperial Physician Ji Yu to let Shen Yu eat without restraint. In fact, the amount of meat was strictly controlled by him. Shen Yu couldn't refute this statement. Indeed, it was up to him to choose what meat to eat. Shang Junlin chuckled. A Yu was really passionate last night. I couldn't stop myself even if I wanted to. Shen Yu reached out to cover his mouth. Her porcelain skin was stained with red plum blossoms. Shang Junlin looked at the marks he left behind and gulped. We won't talk anymore. Have some porridge first. Are you hungry? Shang Junlin lowered his voice. Seeing his dark eyes, Shen Yu didn't dare to provoke him anymore. Last night, the venison had an effect. If he did it again today, his waist and legs would be gone. I'm hungry. Shen Yu retracted his hand and slowly wrapped himself in the quilt. No matter how much Shang Junlin thought about it, it was impossible for him to really do anything to her now. Last night, Shen Yu wasn't awake, but he was. At that level, if not for the deer blood and meat, Shen Yu wouldn't have done it. What's more, he also ate the venison. Although he was conscious, he was still somewhat affected. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to grab the youth's ankle and drag him back to continue. Shang Junlin closed his eyes and suppressed the churning images in his mind. He took the porridge and slowly fed it to Shen Yu. Shen Yu was so tired that he didn't even bother to lift his arms. He enjoyed the service of the emperor with a clear conscience. Shen Yu was indeed hungry. The porridge also suited his appetite. Not long after, he finished the bowl of porridge and felt full. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Shen Yu finally had the mind to think about other things. What time is it now? Have the hunters already gone out? Shang Junlin told him the time. As Shen Yu expected, it was already noon. Last night, they played until dawn before Shen Yu begged them to stop. It wasn't strange for Shen Yu to sleep until now. Your Majesty didn't go out today? Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin. The man was still wearing a narrow-sleeved black robe today. His hair was tied up high. He didn't wear the crown that symbolized his status as an emperor. He only used a jade crown engraved with dragon patterns to hold his hair in place. A Yu is here. Where can I go? Compared to hunting, Shang Junlin wanted to stay with Shen Yu more. Shen Yu didn't wake up. If he went out and the first person Shen Yu saw when he woke up wasn't him, Shen Yu wouldn't be happy. He heard people say that after making out, if the other party didn't accompany you when you woke up in the morning, it would be irresponsible. Apart from these reasons, Shang Junlin also wanted to stay by Shen Yu's side. In his heart, he wanted to be the first person Shen Yu saw when he woke up. Knowing Shen Yu's habit, Shang Junlin took the clothes on the side. Do you want me to help you wear them or do you want me to wear them yourself? Shen Yu moved a little. His body didn't have much strength, so he decisively gave up. He had no qualms about ordering the culprit who caused all this. Your Majesty, please help me. Shang Junlin unfolded the clothes and pulled Shen Yu out of the quilt. Even though it was noon, the mountain was still a little cold. Shen Yu shivered a little. The next moment, he was embraced by the man. Except for the hot summer, Shen Yu liked to stick close to Shang Junlin. The man's body temperature was on the high side. For Shen Yu, who was afraid of cold, hugging him was very comfortable. Shang Junlin lifted Shen Yu's arm and helped him put on the coat. After putting on the coat, Shen Yu found that Shang Junlin gave him an icy blue robe with large sleeves. Thinking about it, it seemed that he couldn't ride a horse today. Not only today, it was very likely that he couldn't ride a horse for the next few days. His legs were soft and without any strength. Shen Yu originally wanted to go out for a walk, but he had to give up. Shang Junlin wanted to carry him out, but Shen Yu didn't want to be surrounded by people, so he let it go. In the afternoon, the Prime Minister and Fang Daren came to talk about the matter of Subei. Although it was the autumn hunting season, the daily official business still had to be dealt with. When Shang Junlin stayed in the tent, he spent most of his time reviewing the memorials. Shen Yu didn't want to move. Shang Junlin also didn't want to avoid him for these matters, so he listened to them together. He Chengyu, Shen Qingran, and Fang Jiari were in Subei. All the internal problems were solved. With the aid of various places, the post-disaster reconstruction went smoothly. When Fang Jun left, everything in Subei was on the right track. The officials sent by the imperial court were also willing to do practical work, so there was no need to worry too much. The only thing they needed to care about was the northern desert. The Prime Minister and Fang Daren came to discuss how to deal with the northern desert. The spies of the northern desert in Subei were all caught in one fell swoop. The leader was also taken to the capital. That person's identity was also found out. He was a member of the Northern Desert royal family and the younger brother of the current ruler of the Northern Desert. This identity meant that they had more bargaining chips in their hands. The more honorable the person's status was, the more advantageous it was for them. The Northern Desert wants to take him back, Fang Daren said. It's not surprising. This person has been lurking in Subei for many years. Just the secrets he knows are enough for the Northern Desert Emperor to think of ways to take him back. The Northern Desert was driven out of Subei that year, and for many years they were unwilling to accept it. They want to reoccupy Subei. On the surface, they are peaceful, but there have been many conflicts with the Subei army. The fact that they have planted so many spies in Subei is enough to show that they haven't given up. The Prime Minister was not surprised. According to our people's secret reports, the Northern Desert has been playing tricks these days. They seem to want to send their troops south again. Fang Daren frowned. Such a big turmoil in Subei is a rare opportunity for them. They have coveted the land of the Great Huan for many years. In the past, they didn't dare to act rashly because they were afraid of your majesty. However, time is the best way to erase people's fears. Driven by their growing desire, they have chosen to abandon the memory of their defeat. They feel that this is a rare opportunity and they will definitely succeed in one fell swoop. Shun Yu expressed his opinion. The Prime Minister and Fang Daren didn't have any thoughts about Shun Yu participating in court politics. The Prime Minister had wanted Shun Yu to come to court more than once and had even asked His Majesty about it. Hearing Shun Yu's words, both of them agreed. The Northern Desert had always been ambitious and had coveted the Great Huan. They had known for a long time. Be prepared for both sides. If they want to fight, I didn't fear them in the past, and I won't now. Since they were going to face a possible war, the court needed to be prepared in advance. The Prime Minister and Fang Daren accepted the order and went to make arrangements. The Northern Desert. What's the situation in the Great Huan? The Northern Desert Emperor was a man in his 40s. He sat on the throne that represented the throne and looked at the officials below. He was not in a good mood. No one would be in a good mood if the plan that had been in place for many years was uprooted. The Great Huan is still unwilling to let go. In order to save His Highness, all of our forces in Subei were lost. Now, unless the Great Huan is willing to take the initiative to reveal it, we have no way of knowing His Highness's situation. The official trembled as he knelt below, not daring to raise his head. The Subei has just experienced a great drought. The Subei army has also been affected. This is a rare opportunity. Do you think that if we act now, we can catch the Great Huan off guard? The Northern Desert Emperor's gloomy eyes swept over the officials below. There were many newly promoted officials in the Northern Desert Court. They knew very little about the battle that year and didn't know what kind of terrifying force the Subei army was under the leadership of Shang Junlin. The Northern Desert also wouldn't wantonly publicize how tragic the defeat was. Over time, except for a few people, most people didn't take the Subei army seriously. So what if the Subei army is strong? If we didn't deliberately let them win last time, it's not certain who would win. If you ask me, it's better to directly teach them a lesson. The millions of cavalrymen of the Northern Desert are not just for show. These words were approved by most people. After the defeat, the Great Huan will naturally send His Highness back. There were some officials who were not so optimistic, but the Emperor refused to listen to them. The more they said, the easier it was for them to be despised. The autumn hunt was still in progress. Shun Yu rested for 2 days and could barely walk freely. The competition was also coming to an end. The winner would get a chance to meet the Emperor, which was a great encouragement for the young people who had not yet entered the officialdom. The winner this time was a young man. He was a child of the collateral branch of the Duan family. As usual, Shang Junlin rewarded him, called him to the front and said a few words of encouragement. When he left, the young man's footsteps were light. Shun Yu sat beside Shang Junlin and witnessed the whole process with his own eyes. The Duan family has taught a good child. It was rare that he didn't have the bad habits of the aristocratic families. The banquet was very lively. The young man brought by Grand Secretary Duan won the first prize, which made the aristocratic families proud. An endless stream of people came to congratulate him. Shun Yu looked over there and joked, "The aristocratic families can hold their heads high this time. They should at least be given some benefits." Shang Junlin held a wine cup and said indifferently. Shun Yu looked away and asked curiously, "What did your Majesty hunt these 2 days?" Chapter 159. No matter what, Shang Junlin was the emperor. He couldn't stay in the tent all the time. Shun Yu couldn't ride a horse. Even if he wanted to accompany the emperor, he still had to go out at certain times. When the emperor went hunting, to a certain extent, it also showed the emperor's power and unshakable. The first arrow before the hunt started was shot by Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin definitely wouldn't return empty-handed. Shun Yu had traveled with him before. He knew that this man was proficient in horseback archery and would definitely hunt a lot of prey. "You didn't ask before. I thought you weren't curious about it." Shang Junlin put down the cup in his hand and raised his eyebrows. "I didn't ask before because I wanted to leave the surprise for last," Shun Yu said casually. Shang Junlin didn't expose him. "I didn't remember what they were. Later, I'll ask Meng Chang to bring you the booklet." When they hunted, they were only responsible for shooting arrows. There were specialized people to pick up the prey. It was normal that Shang Junlin didn't remember what they were. As he spoke, Shang Junlin turned to look at Eunuch Meng, who was serving beside him. Without further instructions, Eunuch Meng quickly went to get the booklet. As someone who served the emperor, he should have this kind of eyesight. He should know what his master was going to do through his subtle actions. Shun Yu scooped a spoonful of porridge and put it into his mouth. The dishes in front of him were light and had a certain cooling effect. It couldn't be helped. It was a special situation. "It's a pity that I can only taste the meat roasted by your Majesty." Shun Yu looked at the meat and sighed. The roasted meat was too greasy. He couldn't eat it now. "If you likes it, I'll roast it for you when we return to the palace. There are all kinds of ingredients in the imperial kitchen." Shang Junlin gently wiped the water stain on Shun Yu's mouth. Feeling the sudden gaze on him, Shun Yu calmly covered Shang Junlin's hand. "Your Majesty, it seems that many people are looking at us." Shang Junlin looked up. Under his piercing gaze, Shun Yu's gaze disappeared. "They are very curious about us." Shun Yu stated the truth. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand and said, "They have heard about everything that happened before. Many people wanted to meet you in private, but I stopped them." With Shun Yu's current status, he was qualified to meet the women with titles. Naturally, those women with titles could also send letters to the imperial palace to request to see Shun Yu. In the beginning, the concubines of the vassals were like this. "Why would they want to see me? No matter what, I'm still a man. Most of these officials' families are women, right?" Although the southern wind prevailed in Dahuan and people regarded the southern wind as an elegant thing, there were very few people who actually married a male wife. As far as Shun Yu knew, the wives of the ministers in the imperial court were all women. We dismissed a few of them, and no one mentioned this matter again. Shang Junlin was right. There were many people in the imperial court who were curious about Shun Yu. Before entering the imperial palace, everyone's impression of him was that he was not favored by Jinbei Hu. After entering the imperial palace, except for the banquet, they had no chance to see him in person. Just the fact that he could firmly grasp the emperor's heart was enough for everyone to have a strong interest in him. Not to mention that the emperor was not willing to accept anyone into the imperial harem because of him. Now, the emperor was sitting in the same carriage as him, going in and out with him. It seemed that the emperor doted on him to the bone. Did the world give up the idea of sending women into the imperial harem? No, as long as the ambition did not disappear, this idea would never be eliminated. They did not mention it now because they knew how to judge the situation and knew that it was not a good time. As long as the emperor's love for Shen Yu did not disappear, they could only suppress the idea in their hearts. After the ceremony, Shang Junlin left with Shen Yu, who was bored. After they left, the banquet became really lively. The madams and misses who had a good relationship with each other sat together and talked about all kinds of topics. As they chatted, the topic turned to the emperor and the emperor. I have long been curious about what kind of person the emperor is. He can make our emperor, who has never been moved by the mundane, so fascinated that he can't find north. Seeing him today, he is really extraordinary. With such an appearance, there are not many people in the world who can compare to him. His Majesty and the Emperor are really. The Madam in blue who spoke covered her chest. Why can't my family learn from His Majesty? When the two get along, they really don't put on any airs. His Majesty obviously has true feelings for the Emperor. At this point, the person lowered his voice. I just don't know how long this sincerity will last. This is not something we need to worry about. That's also true. However, the Emperor's actions are so flamboyant, leaving no room for leeway in everything. Aren't you afraid that in the future? Since ancient times, the Emperor was fickle. When he was deeply in love, you were very good. But once the feelings faded, everything in the past could become evidence for him to punish you at will. With His Majesty's temperament, the things you are worried about will most likely not happen. The one who spoke was Madame Fang. With Fang Daren entering the cabinet, Madame Fang's status also rose. Why does Madame Fang say that? The madam who was refuted didn't look very good. His Majesty is not attracted to beauty. If it wasn't for the Emperor entering the palace by accident, I'm afraid the harem would still be empty. Since that is the case, how could the things you said happen? Madame Fang spoke neither quickly nor slowly. Shun Yu didn't know that the court's women had already begun to worry about him falling out of favor in the future. After returning to the tent, Eunuch Meng presented the booklet. The prey that everyone hunted would be recorded. One's own prey could be disposed of at will. It could be given away or kept for oneself to eat. Shang Junlin hunted a lot of things. Some of them were given out as rewards, but more were kept. His Majesty actually hunted so much. Shun Yu was surprised. Shang Junlin spent most of his time in the tent every day. He looked at the booklet. On the first day, they hunted a lot together, but later, they hunted more and more. There was no lack of large ferocious beasts among them. They haven't dealt with this bear yet. When it's done, they will make steamed bear paws for a you. It's a pity that they didn't hunt a tiger. They said they would send it to you before, but we can only wait. Shun Yu didn't hide the shock on his face. He knew that Shang Junlin was very powerful, but this was the first time he witnessed it. It was rare to see such an expression on Shun Yu's face. Shang Junlin felt funny and stroked his face. I hunted it with several generals. Why are you so surprised? His Majesty didn't get hurt, right? Shang Junlin shook his head. It was a coincidence that we were able to hunt that bear. It was originally injured, and it ran into our hunting range in a hurry. It didn't take much effort to kill it. That was a bear. Shun Yu knew that no matter how lightly Shang Junlin described it, the situation at that time was definitely not that easy. Even if the bear was injured, unless it was injured to the point where it couldn't move, the strength of a bear was not something that could be easily matched by a human. I really didn't get hurt. Why don't you check it personally? Shun Yu didn't say anything and began to take off Shang Junlin's clothes. This time, it became Shang Junlin. Are you? Shun Yu's hands didn't stop moving, and his eyebrows slightly raised. Didn't your Majesty ask me to check it? Shang Junlin had no choice but to stiffen his body and let Shun Yu check it. Fortunately, there were no new injuries on his body except for the old ones. After Shun Yu finished checking, he casually adjusted his clothes. Your Majesty's body is precious. You can't get hurt casually. Shang Junlin didn't care about his carelessly opened clothes and put his arms around Shun Yu. Shun Yu didn't expect his action and fell into his arms. Are you worried about me? Shang Junlin whispered in Shun Yu's ear. His voice was low and contained a smile. Shun Yu's ear itched and moved uncomfortably. "What do you think, Your Majesty?" "I think so." After saying that, Shang Junlin kissed Shun Yu's trembling earlobe. After resting for 2 days, Shun Yu finally recovered a little. It was very boring to stay in the camp all the time. When Shang Junlin went out to hunt, Shun Yu took the initiative to ask to go with him. Shang Junlin couldn't persuade him, so he asked someone to bring a white horse. Shun Yu didn't come out for a few days. Even his breathing was light as Shun Yu rode the horse on the forest path. Unlike last time, besides the imperial bodyguards, there were also a few ministers, civil officials, and military generals. Shun Yu roughly looked at them and guessed that they should be close ministers of Shang Junlin. After walking for a while, everyone dispersed. The leader of the imperial guards followed them, and the other ministers went to other places. They wouldn't move together. First, there were too many of them. Before they could get close, the prey would be scared away. Second, the prey they could hunt was limited. It was better to disperse. The leader of the imperial guards followed Shang Junlin. His main duty was to protect him. The imperial bodyguards accompanying them were also the backbone of the imperial guards. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin rode side by side at the front. Without the other ministers, the two of them communicated more privately. After shooting down the running prey again, the leader of the imperial guards following behind them had already become numb from the initial shock. He didn't know how those people who spread rumors that His Highness was a sickly person were so blind. He really wanted to let those people see His Highness's valiant posture when hunting. After walking into the depths of the forest, Shun Yu saw the prey and aimed an arrow at it. Whoosh, the prey fell to the ground. When the people accompanying them were about to pick it up, Shun Yu and Shang Junlin said at the same time, "Wait." The horse kicked its hooves uneasily. For a moment, the forest was so quiet that it was almost strange. The wind blew through the forest, and the branches and leaves rustled. The leader of the imperial guards made a gesture. The imperial guards rode their horses and surrounded Shang Junlin and Shun Yu in the middle to protect them. Buzz, suddenly, the quiet forest became restless. Countless arrows broke through the air and shot toward them. The men in black who were hiding in the bushes appeared at the same time and attacked them with short swords. Shang Junlin didn't think about anything else. He pulled Shun Yu onto Wu Kuang's back and protected him in his arms. "Protect His Majesty." For a moment, the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Shun Yu curled up in the man's arms. His heart was extremely calm. This was an assassination that had been planned for a long time. The most difficult thing to deal with were the assassins hiding in the trees. There weren't many of them, but the arrows they shot were impossible to guard against. Shun Yu half crouched on the horse's back and calmly calculated the angle. He didn't have many arrows left, so he had to use every one of them. Now was the time. Shun Yu suddenly turned around, knocked an arrow at the fastest speed, and released it. Bang! The assassins hiding in the trees fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of dust. Fortunately, the assassins hiding in the trees didn't have an endless supply of arrows. After the first wave of arrows ended, they also joined the battle. Without the threat of arrows, it was much easier for the Imperial Guards to deal with these assassins. The Imperial Guards protected Shang Junlin and Shun Yu as they retreated. The other party was well prepared. They faintly surrounded them in the middle. "Rush out." Shang Junlin held the reins with one hand on Shun Yu's waist. The other hand was holding a long sword. The sword was stained with the enemy's blood. He looked like the god of death. Shun Yu had been observing the surroundings. He pointed to the weakest spot and said, "Go that way, they couldn't be trapped here." Chapter 160. Realizing their intentions, the enemies gradually gathered towards the weakest areas. "Don't let them escape," the leader of the assassins shouted. Those who were able to follow Shang Junlin were the best of the best. Under the leadership of Shang Junlin, they slaughtered their way out. The silence in the forest was broken. The sound of weapons clashing would attract the attention of others sooner or later. The assassins knew this and needed to end the battle quickly. Shun Yu had used up more than half of the arrows on his body. Shang Junlin held him tightly in front of his chest and was not injured at all. However, the smell of blood lingered in the air. Blood splattered on his body and face. It was the enemy's blood. Shun Yu clung tightly to Shang Junlin. At this time, he could not bring any unnecessary burden to him. He gripped the bow tightly and his knuckles turned white. Every time someone tried to attack Shang Junlin when he was unprepared, they would be killed by him. The two of them cooperated well and there was no danger along the way. The hidden dragon guards who received the secret order appeared in time and the situation was reversed. Keep them alive. I want to know who ordered them to do this. Shang Junlin rode his horse and looked down at the suppressed assassins. Shun Yu heaved a sigh of relief and relaxed his body. He leaned into Shang Junlin's arms and relaxed his tense nerves. All his strength flowed out like a tide. If Shang Junlin did not hold him tightly, he would have fallen down. Such a big matter could not be concealed. When Shun Yu and Shang Junlin returned to the camp, the officials had already received the news. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin were stained with blood. Many of the guards behind them were injured. Shang Junlin ordered them to take care of the situation. He also brought Shun Yu back to the camp. The assassins were handed over to official Fang. Shang Junlin did not care about the lives of these people. He just wanted to know who ordered them to do this. The palace maids nimbly prepared hot water and clean clothes, and then retreated. Shang Junlin was wearing black clothes. The blood only deepened the color a little. Shun Yu was wearing light clothes. Once blood came into contact with his clothes, it would be very obvious. Shun Yu touched Shang Junlin's clothes. They were all wet. When he let go, his hands were stained with blood. He frowned. Is your majesty hurt? It's all other people's blood. Shang Junlin took off his outer clothes and wiped the blood off Shun Yu's hands with a clean inner shirt. You protected me. How could I get hurt? Shun Yu's performance surprised Shang Junlin. It was not easy to remain calm in the face of such a dangerous situation. He was worried that Shun Yu would be frightened, so he protected Shun Yu in his arms and did not let him see the bloody scene. Unexpectedly, he did not feel the slightest fear from Shun Yu. He even avoided several injuries because of Shun Yu's help. Today, it's all thanks to you. Shang Junlin raised his hand to touch Shun Yu's face. When he saw the blood on his hand, he paused. Shun Yu took the initiative to hold his hand and put it on his face. With your majesty here, I'm not afraid of anything. Feeling the body under his hand trembling slightly, Shang Junlin's thoughts were interrupted. Yu was frightened today. Shun Yu shook his head, but his body trembled more and more violently, revealing his true emotions. Yu was very powerful today. Shang Junlin gently kissed his forehead and held him in his arms. When the body in his arms stopped trembling, he released him. Wash up first. Soak in hot water and relax. Okay. Shun Yu nodded gently. Shun Yu could not stand the smell of blood. He took off his clothes as fast as he could and soaked in hot water. At this moment, there was no trace of fear on his face. Shang Junlin was called away by the minister. After such a big assassination, Shang Junlin could not be idle. Under the hot steam, Shun Yu slightly closed his eyes. No one could see the coldness in his eyes. Of course, he was not afraid. He had encountered many similar things in his previous life. However, he was not afraid in his previous life. In this life, although he was not favored by Count Shunbei, he had never really faced a life-and-death situation. He should not be so calm when encountering such a thing. Shun Yu was thinking about who caused this assassination. Did the same assassination happen in his previous life? He did not know. It was easy to make a list of all the suspicious people in his mind. Shang Junlin had been very active during this period of time. Whether it was in the imperial court or outside, people with motives could be found. The water gradually cooled down. Shun Yu stopped thinking. After washing up, Shun Yu changed into clean clothes and went to find Shang Junlin. It's cold outside. Dry your hair first before going out. She came in with a dry cloth. His Majesty had specially ordered her to wait outside and inform him if something went wrong. Shun Yu thought about it. It was not good to go out with wet hair. So, he sat down. How is it outside? It had been some time since they came back. A lot of guards came. The entrances and exits of the mountain were all blocked. Without His Majesty's order, no one can leave. Mu, she said while drying Shen Yu's hair. Where is His Majesty? His Majesty summoned Prime Minister Fang and several other ministers for a meeting. They are just next door. How did the people outside behave? All the ministers were reasonable. They did not make trouble and stayed quietly in their own tents. Some of them were hunting outside. His Majesty also sent people to bring them back. After his hair was almost dry, Eunuch Meng came in with a bowl of medicine. It seems that you are almost done. This is the medicine that His Majesty specially ordered. Please take it. Shen Yu took the medicine and slowly stirred it with a spoon. Because it was soaked in hot water, his face was faintly red. At first glance, his complexion was very good. His Majesty is worried about you, so he specially asked me to come and serve you. If you need anything, just let me know. After Shen Yu drank the medicine, Eunuch Meng hurriedly presented the candied fruits that had been prepared. Shen Yu picked up one and put it into his mouth. Did His Majesty also ask for this? Eunuch Meng nodded. His Majesty knows that you are afraid of bitter food, so he asked me to prepare a lot of candied fruits. Shen Yu ate a few candied fruits and reluctantly suppressed the bitter taste in his mouth. He did not continue. Where is His Majesty now? Is it convenient for me to go and find him? Yes, yes, Eunuch Meng nodded again and again. Please come with me. Eunuch Meng did not go with him today. He heard from the imperial bodyguards that it was very dangerous today. Shang Junlin specially ordered that if Shen Yu was afraid and wanted to find him, he could directly bring people there. Now that Shen Yu wanted to see His Majesty, Eunuch Meng would naturally bring people there. But Eunuch Meng could not tell that Shen Yu was afraid. Shen Yu did not intend to pretend to be afraid. Except for the matter of his rebirth, he felt that there was no need to hide anything from Shang Junlin. Eunuch Meng took Shen Yu to another tent, which was specially used for discussions. There were 2 burly guards standing outside. When they saw Shen Yu, they respectfully saluted. The discussion in the tent had come to an end. When he saw Shen Yu, Shang Junlin waved his hand to indicate that they should leave first. Shang Junlin had also changed his clothes. He was no longer wearing a narrow-sleeved riding suit, but an imperial robe with wide sleeves. With such a thing happening, it was naturally impossible for the hunt to continue. The most important thing right now was to investigate the origins of the assassin and see if there were any other assassins hiding in the mountains. Compared to other things, the safety of the emperor was the most important. Do you have any clues? We are still investigating. Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair on his temples. In the following time, you must stay by Zhen's side. Other than those who were caught, there are other assassins. Just in case, Zhen will be more at ease if you stay by Zhen's side. It was still uncertain whether the assassins had accomplices or not. Some of the assassins who ambushed them in the mountains were killed on the spot, and some were captured alive. Does Your Majesty have any thoughts about the origin of these people? There was another question that Shen Yu was also uncertain. Did these people come for Your Majesty, or for me? Shang Junlin's heart trembled. They all tacitly agreed that these people came for him, but they never thought that there was another possibility. What if these people came for Shen Yu? Shang Junlin immediately called Eunuch Meng. Go find Fang Jun, tell him, Zhen doesn't care what method he uses, he must find out from these people who they want to assassinate. Eunuch Meng accepted the order and left. Fang Jun didn't know what Shen Yu had experienced when he was young. Although he didn't understand Shang Junlin's order, he still followed the order to interrogate these people. Your Majesty, we caught a sneaky person. A guard pushed in a tied-up person. Shen Yu glanced at the person. He was dressed as a servant and had an ordinary face. He was forced to kneel on the ground and trembled in fear. Take him to Fang Jun and let him interrogate him properly. Yes. The guard carried the person out. Shang Junlin rubbed his eyebrows in annoyance. With such a big mistake, the official in charge of the inspection couldn't absolve himself from the blame and came to beg for forgiveness. Shang Junlin sat at the head of the table and looked down at the official kneeling on the ground. He didn't speak, and the tent fell into a dead silence. The official kneeled on the ground, His legs couldn't help but tremble, and his back was gradually soaked with cold sweat. You said that when you sent people to inspect the mountain, there was nothing wrong with it. After a long time, the emperor's ambiguous question came from above. Yes, I dare not lie. Even if I have 10,000 guts, I dare not lie about this matter. Your Majesty, please understand. The official kowtowed again and again. He really didn't dare to lie about this matter. This matter was related to more than his life. If he didn't handle it well, it would implicate his entire family and make him a sinner of the entire family. Tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table, Shang Junlin said in a light voice, I can give you a chance to atone for your crimes. If you can find out how these people quietly avoided all the guards and entered the mountains, I will be lenient. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you. No one expected that there would be an assassination during this autumn hunt. The mountain was not as safe as the palace. The officials began to write letters, hoping that the emperor could return to the palace as soon as possible. If this assassination was targeted at Your Majesty, they must have been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Shen Yu flipped through the letters handed by the officials. He had to admit that their considerations were reasonable. The palace was indeed safer than the mountain. I haven't encountered this kind of thing for a long time. I thought they had stopped. Shang Junlin sneered. Driven by profit, ambition will never die. This kind of thing could never be stopped. After washing up, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin prepared to sleep. Suddenly, the leader of the Imperial Guards came to report. Eunuch Meng was guarding outside. Seeing the anxious look on the other party's face, he didn't dare to delay and hurriedly reported to the emperor. Your Majesty, please go and take a look. If there is nothing important, Eunuch Meng won't disturb you at this time. Shen Yu pushed Shang Junlin. Not long after, Shang Junlin walked in with a cold face. Shen Yu sat up. What happened? Shang Junyu was rescued. Chapter 161. What? Shen Yu grabbed the blanket and asked, when was he rescued? Today. Shang Junlin's expression softened as he sat on the bed. Today. Shen Yu muttered, could today's assassination be related to King Yu's rescue? Shen Yu's suspicion wasn't without reason. There were many forces with motives, but there weren't many who would rescue King Yu at the same time. Perhaps. I wonder if Fang Jun has found anything. Shang Junlin adjusted the blanket for Shen Yu. King Yu hasn't been imprisoned for a day or two. Aside from the He family, is there anyone else who tried to rescue him? Shen Yu was very concerned about King Yu's matter. Although the development of this life was different from his previous life due to his intervention, no one knew how the story would turn out until the last moment. Shang Junlin shook his head, no. After the prison break failed, I thought that they had given up on it. The imperial exam fraud case came to an end, and the officials involved received their due punishment. Due to King Yu's special identity, Shang Junlin only locked him up and didn't send him to the execution ground like the other officials. The next morning, Shang Junlin summoned the Prime Minister and other officials for a meeting. They all knew a little about King Yu's matter, and their hearts sank when they learned that he was rescued. Did Lord Fang get any results? The Prime Minister asked. First, it was an assassination, and then a prison break. The timing couldn't be more coincidental, and no one felt that it was an accident. It's hard to pry open their mouths. I found out that their target was Your Majesty, but they refused to say anything else. Lord Fang sighed. Those who were arranged to carry out this kind of assassination were mostly men of sacrifice, and it was difficult to get anything out of them. What about the person we caught in the mountains yesterday? Did he say anything? Shang Junlin asked. That person couldn't withstand the torture and revealed a lot of information. He came with Lord Shu, and his Madame Shu's servant. He received Madame Shu's orders to pass information to Hanju City. A few days ago, Madame Shu instructed him to deliver a letter to someone from Hanju City, and he went to receive the letter yesterday. Fang Jun explained the results of the interrogation. From the results of this subject's interrogation, there is no definite connection between him and the assassin. An official's wife that just came to the capital from another place shouldn't be related to an assassin. But The Prime Minister paused briefly before he voiced out his doubts. His Majesty sent an official to Hanju City because of the Shu family's daughter. So why would she be communicating with Hanju City at this time? What's written in the letter? Shang Junlin tapped his knuckles on the table. That person didn't know the contents of the letter. He couldn't find the person who was supposed to receive the letter, so he wandered around there and was arrested as a suspicious person. I've already sent people to find the person who received the letter according to his description, Fang Jun replied. We trust Minister Fang very much. When Shen Yu woke up, Shang Junlin was not around. Mu Shi heard the noise and came in to serve him. After she went out, Shen Yu found that the palace maids were packing up. His Majesty ordered us to return to the palace in advance, Mu Shi explained. Shen Yu could understand that two major incidents had happened one after the other. The ministers also received the news and began to pack up. We didn't encounter such incidents in the past autumn hunt. I wonder if there are still assassins hiding in the dark. His Majesty has already sent people to search. Last night was peaceful, so it should be fine. I hope it can be confirmed quickly so that we can return as soon as possible. No one wanted to stay in a place where assassins might appear. Shang Junlin gave 3 days. If they still found nothing, the official in charge of this matter could be executed. Compared to the past, this was already lenient. Lord An, who was in charge of checking the safety of Chiwa Mountain in advance, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and personally led people into the mountain to investigate. The atmosphere in the camp was very tense. The people who were called back on the first day didn't know what was going on. After they learned what had happened, they were all shocked and broke out in cold sweat. Assassination was a common occurrence for Shang Junlin, but for many of the young masters of aristocratic families, it was a first. After such an incident, the hunt could no longer continue. Everyone gathered together. Besides being nervous, they could only find something to relieve their emotions. The madams and misses who were close to each other gathered together to chat. The young masters had nothing to do, so they had their eyes on the game. A few days ago, they had hunted a lot of game back, enough for them to eat for more than 10 days. The elders in the family were busy with official business, so they couldn't help. They could only gather in 2s and 3s, make a fire, and roast the food themselves. Shang Junlin was very busy these days. Shen Yu occasionally went with him to discuss official business. Fang Jun was very resourceful. 2 days later, he managed to get some information from those people. According to those people, the purpose of their trip was only to assassinate. The higher-ups gave them an order. Even if they couldn't succeed, they had to create chaos. The more chaos, the better. They also said that they were divided into 2 groups. One group went up the mountain, and the other group stayed in the capital. They didn't know what exactly they were going to do. They waited for several days and finally found a good opportunity to act. When was it? Even without Fang Jun saying it, everyone knew. They didn't have a spy. The Prime Minister hit the nail on the head. Yes, Fang Jun's expression was serious. The spy disguised himself as a servant of a minister and went up the mountain with them. He would report to them every day about the movements on the mountain, mainly the movements of His Majesty and His Highness. As the Emperor, Shang Junlin's every move was widely watched. During the hunt, he wouldn't deliberately hide his whereabouts. It wasn't difficult to find out where he went. Find that person. I want to know if his master knows what he is doing, Shang Junlin said coldly. Regardless of whether the officials who brought him in knew or not, they couldn't completely stay out of it. 2 hours later, Shang Junlin finished dealing with official business and saw Shen Yu outside. What are you doing? Shang Junlin walked over and asked. I'm thinking about who saved Prince Yu. Shen Yu looked back. There was still a trace of confusion in his eyes that hadn't disappeared yet. Shen Yu only told Shang Junlin part of the truth. What he was really thinking about was what happened in his previous life. At this time in his previous life, he followed Prince Yu to his fief, but Prince Yu didn't stay there. In addition, during that time, he was constantly sick and muddle-headed. He didn't know much about the outside world. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't find any useful information. There was even less description about this period of time in the book. It only mentioned Shun Qingran's suffering in the imperial palace. Other than that, there were only a few unimportant words. Fang Jun got some information. Shang Junlin told Shun Yu the information he got. There were two groups of people. The group that stayed in the capital was to take the opportunity to kidnap Prince Yu, right? Shun Yu pulled himself back from his thoughts. I think so too. This assassination was actually very well planned. At least before the incident, no one noticed it. The only thing they underestimated was that I was already familiar with all kinds of assassination methods. Even if the hidden dragon guards were to stay somewhere else, I would still have a way to inform them immediately. On the third day, Lorden finally found a way for the assassins to enter the mountain without alerting the guards. He barely managed to save his own life. Under Fang Jun's investigation, the person who secretly passed the information to the assassins was also found. Coincidentally, it was Lord Shu's servant. When Lord Shu was brought to the emperor, he was completely stunned. He didn't know how he became an accomplice of the assassins. Your Majesty, I am innocent. I really don't know what is going on. Lord Shu's forehead was on the ground as tears and snot flowed down his face. Then tell me, did this servant follow you up the mountain? Fang Jun stood at the side and asked. Lord Shu turned his head and looked at the servant kneeling beside him. It is true that I brought him here, but I really don't know what he did. Your Majesty, please investigate. Shang Junlin listened to the commotion below and frowned. On the other side, Madame Shu had been feeling uneasy ever since Lord Shu was called away. She kept pacing back and forth in the tent. The bad premonition in her heart was getting stronger and stronger. The person she sent to collect the information didn't come back. With such a big thing happening, she didn't dare to ask outside. She could only wait for news. A few days had passed and she no longer held on to any hope. That person was most likely dead. She only hoped that the communication with her family hadn't been discovered. After Prince Yu was rescued, he fell into a state of disbelief. He thought that he would stay in prison for the rest of his life. He didn't expect to see the light of day again. He stood in the courtyard in a daze and felt the sunlight on his body. He was still in a daze. Did he really come out? Wasn't it just his imagination? He had once had such a dream. In his dream, he had returned to his fief, raised his arms and shouted loudly. With a single call, he had brought the soldiers who believed in him back to the capital and returned all the pain to Shang Junlin. Then, he woke up from the dream. He was still in the dark and damp prison. He had nothing. Under the huge difference between reality and the dream, he only wanted to drown in the dream and didn't want to wake up. Being rescued this time, was it just a dream he had? Your Highness, quickly pack up. We have to set off. A middle-aged man walked over. Oh, okay. Prince Yu seemed to have recovered from his shock. Where are we going? We have to hide from the imperial court's troops. My men have caused some trouble for the emperor, so we have to make the best use of our time. We will be safe after we pass through Hanju City. Why Hanju City? There's someone there to receive us. If it wasn't for Prince Yu's bloodline and the orders left behind by that person, they wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to rescue him and even lose so many men. Thinking about the men of sacrifice that were sent to assassinate the emperor, the man felt a pain in his heart. It wasn't easy for him to nurture those men, but more than half of them were lost in this operation. Prince Yu, who was in a daze, didn't notice that these people who rescued him were only respectful to him on the surface. They rushed towards Hanju City. After confirming that there were no other assassins on Chiua Mountain, Shang Junlin ordered them to return to the palace. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin were still in the same carriage. This time, no one said anything. They didn't have the mood to care about these things. The number of guards accompanying them had increased by half. Shun Yu leaned over and rubbed Shang Junlin's furrowed brows. Your Majesty, are you still thinking about Prince Yu? I immediately sent the hidden dragon guards to investigate, but they didn't find any trace of them. I have no clue where they came from. This group of people was hidden in the dark, and the one that Feng Pingqi fished out was only one of the forces. After being locked up in the prison for so long, Prince Yu can't do anything even if he leaves. Those people didn't do anything before, so I thought they had given up, Shen Yu said slowly. Prince Yu is just a title. What they care about is never the person, but the identity he represents. Shang Junlin knew this better than anyone else. Chapter 162. Perhaps they sincerely wanted to assist King Yu at the beginning, but people's hearts are fickle. Who can guarantee that they won't have other thoughts when they're faced with the power at their fingertips? Your Majesty, do you mean that King Yu is just a puppet to them? Shen Yu quickly figured it out. In this way, many things before could be explained. Why were they indifferent to the dirty water splashed on King Yu? Why were they not anxious when King Yu was imprisoned for so long? Wait, there were many other unreasonable points. It was because they didn't care about King Yu the most. All they needed to do was to find the right time and pay the smallest price to save the person. As for what kind of suffering King Yu would suffer during this period, it was not their concern. Mount Chiue was within the boundary of the capital. When the emperor was assassinated, most of the capital's forces would flock here. The empty garrison gave the jailbreakers an opportunity. So far, I haven't thoroughly investigated what the former emperor left for King Yu. In the early years, I interrogated the former emperor's close officials and found out some hidden things that even they didn't know. Everyone knew that after Shang Junlin ascended to the throne, he had killed many old officials of the previous dynasty. If not for this, more than half of the power in the imperial court would not have been emptied out and carried out a thorough purge. However, very few people knew that a portion of those people had not been executed from the beginning. They were secretly locked up and squeezed dry of their last remaining value. Wasn't it rumored that the former emperor was muddle-headed and tyrannical in the late years? Shen Yu scratched his chin. It doesn't seem like it. No matter how ridiculous he was in the late years, he was still a winner who defeated many competitors to ascend the throne in the early years. Never underestimate such a person. Shang Junlin didn't care why the former emperor's temperament changed so much in the late years. There was only a blood feud between him and the former emperor, not a father-son relationship. Shen Yu changed the topic. Did Lord Fang find any new clues? Most of the information he knew was directly obtained from Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin replied, Lord Shu did not know about that servant's actions. He did not even know that Madame Shu had secretly sent someone to contact Hanju. The assassin's confession can match up with the kidnapping of the King of Yu. The two came from the same faction. Shen Yu, can you find out where King Yu was taken from them? Shang Junlin, they don't know. The two forces acted separately. Perhaps in order to prevent the current situation from happening, the assassins didn't know the follow-up actions of the other side. Shen Yu, it seems that the person behind the scenes also knows that the failure rate of the assassination is very high. He never thought that these assassins would be able to return in one piece. Shang Junlin, regardless of whether their operation succeeds or not, from the moment they took over this mission, they were destined to sacrifice themselves for it. Shen Yu agreed with this point. If they didn't succeed, it was needless to say what would happen if they were caught. Even if they succeeded, it was impossible for them to escape unscathed. Lord Shu was the one who brought the informant up the mountain. Perhaps Your Majesty can investigate in Hanju. Even if Lord Shu knew nothing about the inside story, Shen Yu still felt that it was too much of a coincidence. Just as well. We can investigate the situation of the Shu family and Lady Shu's family in Hanju. There was a ready-made reason. Because the Shu family's daughter offended the emperor and the emperor, there was no need to worry about others being suspicious. After returning to the imperial palace, Shang Junlin was busy dealing with the administrative affairs piled up. Shen Yu returned to the Yuzhang palace. Even if the master wasn't there, the palace servants didn't dare to slack off. Everything in the Yuzhang palace was the same as when Shen Yu left. After not seeing each other for a few days, Shen Yu was thinking about the flowers in the greenhouse. He simply tidied up and brought Mu Shi to the greenhouse. After the incident last time, the greenhouse was replaced with a new batch of palace servants. When they saw Shen Yu, the palace servants respectfully saluted. The greenhouse was divided into several rooms. One room was dedicated to the flowers sent by Shang Junlin. The other room was for the flowers sent by the servants who heard that Shen Yu liked, including the one sent by Prince and Shun Yu, first went to take a look at the ones he personally took care of. Knowing that he liked flowers and plants, the palace servants served him very well. The plants in the greenhouse were thriving, and flowers of all colors were blooming. Shun Yu watered them, loosened the soil, and went to the other side. This flower hasn't withered yet. Looking at the beautiful blooming flower, Shun Yu was surprised. This is the first time this servant has seen such a long flowering period. Moo, she exclaimed. It was also the first time Shun Yu saw it. The greenhouse was ventilated. When the breeze blew, the branches and leaves swayed as if they were welcoming the visitor. Young master, look. Don't these flowers seem to be welcoming you? Moo, she was a young girl after all. She naturally liked beautiful flowers and plants. Shun Yu nodded. He called the palace servants who were waiting on the side and asked, "This flower hasn't withered yet?" In reply to your highness, "Yes, it has always been like this." "Have you figured out its species now?" Shun Yu remembered that Shang Junlin had been asking people to investigate the origin of this flower. This servant went to ask the people sent by Prince An. They only said that this flower was accidentally found on the mountain. They don't know the specific name. The palace servant replied, "How can His Highness Prince An be so careless as to send a flower of unknown origin to the imperial palace?" Moo, she was dissatisfied with the answer. Shun Yu was also puzzled. After all, things sent to the imperial palace were not as simple as they seemed. If something went wrong in the middle, the person who sent it would also have to take responsibility. They said that Prince An sent this flower after confirming that it was completely harmless to the human body. The palace servant told the answer. It wasn't difficult to verify whether a plant had any effect on the human body. Shun Yu remembered the scene he saw in the illusion before. He subconsciously glanced at the center of the flower. The delicate stamens were clustered together. There was nothing he expected. Shun Yu withdrew his gaze. He found it funny. It was just an illusion under the effect of hallucinogenic drugs. How could he take it seriously? After returning, Imperial Physician Ji Yu came to take his pulse. Imperial Physician Ji Yu was not among the people accompanying this autumn hunt. Imperial Physician Wu had not yet returned to the capital. Someone needed to be in the Imperial Hospital. After taking his pulse, Imperial Physician Ji Yu changed the prescription for Shun Yu to recuperate. Your health is much better than before. You just need to take the new prescription once a day. All medicine was poisonous. Even if it was used to recuperate, it should not be taken too much after the body had improved. Shun Yu did not like to drink medicine. Hearing this, the smile on his face deepened. Moo, she was also very happy to hear this result. Her young master's health had been poor since he was young. He had been taking medicine all year round. Now that he was finally getting better, she was happier than anything else. Shun Yu remembered that night when he told Imperial Physician Ji Yu about the situation after eating venison. "I don't know if this is normal. Your Highness, don't worry. Venison is very nutritious. Your body has recovered a lot after a period of recuperation. It's a good thing that you have a reaction. It proves that you are indeed recovering." Shun Yu nodded to show that he understood. "Is your Highness not as afraid of the cold as before this year?" Imperial Physician Ji Yu asked. Shun Yu recalled that it seemed to be the case. After late autumn, the temperature in the capital dropped sharply. Every time it was this time, Shun Yu would have entered the winter ahead of time. But this year, he did not feel much. Seeing Shun Yu nod, Imperial Physician Ji Yu said, "It means that the medicine you used before has taken effect. If my guess is not wrong, this winter, your Highness will not be as afraid of the cold as before." This was a good thing for Shun Yu. After Shang Junlin came back, Shun Yu told him what Imperial Physician Ji Yu said. The man, who had been troubled by all kinds of things for a day, smiled. "You will be better soon." Shun Yu's health had always been a huge stone in Shang Junlin's heart. Imperial Physician Gu's words undoubtedly gave him a reassurance. Subei was still negotiating with the Northern Desert. The Northern Desert Prince, who was imprisoned in the capital, was also received friendly treatment by Da Huan. Shang Junlin continued to throw him to Fang Jun to deal with. It would be best if he could get more useful information. Seeing that Da Huan did not intend to release him, the northern desert could not sit still. The cavalry was summoned. The war was about to start. Subei had been guarding against the northern desert. As soon as the northern desert made a move, the Subei army found out. The memorial was sent to the capital at the fastest speed. In the imperial court, there were two views on the issue of the northern desert sending troops. One side felt that they must fight. The northern desert dared to be disrespectful to Da Huan. They should be angered by Da Huan. The other side felt that Subei had just experienced a natural disaster. It was not suitable for war. Both sides had their own views. No one could convince the other. In the end, several people cupped their hands. Your Majesty, please make a decision. Da Huan has never been afraid of any enemy. It was so in the past, and it is still so now. Since we can't reach an agreement, let's fight. Shang Junlin concluded in a deep voice. Some ministers with opinions wanted to say something. In the end, they just opened their mouths and silently suppressed their rebuttal. His Majesty had obviously made a decision long ago. It was not something they could change with just a few words. Since they had to prepare for war, the imperial court fell into a new round of business. Fortunately, they used the method of donations from the people during the drought. They were not short of food and fodder now. This was probably something that the northern desert people did not expect. The prince who was hiding in Subei was caught. They did not have time to inform the northern desert. Your Majesty, did you arrange for Jiyu Huai to enter the Subei army? Shun Yu took a peeled orange and put it in his mouth. The orange was peeled by Shang Junlin. His hands, which were used to hold a sword to kill enemies or hold a pen to edit memorials, were now used to peeling all kinds of fruits for Shun Yu. The hidden dragon guards who secretly protected Fang Jun in Subei had returned with Fang Jun. Only Jiyu Huai did not return to the capital. Shun Yu asked Imperial Physician Jiyu indirectly. Imperial Physician Jiyu only said that Jiyu Huai had something to do outside and could not return for the time being. Yes, I gave him a choice at that time. He asked to stay. I thought that he would have to train for a few more years. If the northern desert sends troops, it will give him an excellent opportunity to train. After peeling the orange, Shang Junlin took a handkerchief from a palace servant and wiped his hands. Does he plan to keep it a secret from Imperial Physician Jiyu? Shun Yu could tell from Imperial Physician Gu's attitude that he did not know about this matter. This is between the two of them. Even if Jiyu Huai wants to keep it a secret, Imperial Physician Jiyu will know when this war is over and he has made a meritorious service. Shun Yu finished the last bite of the orange and was silent for a while. In this life, many things were different from his previous life. He had changed far more than just his own fate. Your Majesty said that you want to go to war. Did any of the ministers object? Because of Shang Junlin's intention, Shun Yu knew what happened in the imperial court very well. The Subei army has not experienced a real war for a long time. This time, I also want to let them see blood. A sharp blade would only become duller after a long time. Chapter 163. Over the years, although there had been constant friction between the northern desert and Subei, there had never been a real war. Firstly, both sides had given each other some leeway. Secondly, Shang Junlin and his men had been too ruthless back then, so the northern desert did not dare to make any moves. A few years had passed. Time had eliminated the fear and encouraged the ambitions of the northern desert people. Especially after they had successfully connected with the upper officials of the northern desert, they had been misled into thinking that the northern desert army was just SOSO. The drought this time made them think that they had encountered the best opportunity, and the people in power could not resist the temptation. How is the situation of the northern desert army now? Shun Yu was curious. I sent the hidden dragon guards to the northern desert to understand the development of the northern desert army over the years. They did not disappoint me. They did not fail in all the necessary training. Over the years, the northern desert army has recruited many new people. They have not seen a real battlefield. I want to use this opportunity to let them grow up completely. Soldiers who had not experienced war, no matter how powerful they looked, would not be able to perform well on the battlefield. Shang Junlin did not need such soldiers. He needed soldiers who could fight for the Great Huan dynasty. Your Majesty, can you tell me about the northern desert? Shen Yu blinked and looked at Shang Junlin with his chin in his hand. Why do you suddenly want to know about this? Shang Junlin sat beside him. I want to know more about Your Majesty. Your Majesty, so many things happened in the past. I have only heard about them from others. I want to hear it from Your Majesty. Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin. His eyes were very beautiful. When he focused on someone, there was a light in his eyes. It was as if only the person he was looking at could enter his eyes. No one could resist such a gaze. Shang Junlin was also the same. He held Shen Yu's wrist and slowly talked about the things that happened in the past. The real confrontation with the northern desert was after I ascended the throne. The late emperor listened to the treacherous officials and ceded the Subei region to the northern desert in exchange for a moment of peace. However, hungry wolves never know satisfaction. One concession only made them want more. The northern desert was still not satisfied with the Subei region and wanted more and more fertile land. Coincidentally, I ascended the throne and was too lazy to argue with the ministers in the imperial court, so I simply led the troops to the Subei region. Shang Junlin had his own army, which was the strength that he had accumulated step by step during his early years in the army. These people had followed him through life and death, and had accompanied him from nothing to becoming the ruler of a country. They had witnessed every step of his growth, and had also taken back the land that the Great Huan dynasty had lost step by step. Because it was a place that the late emperor had taken the initiative to give away, the Subei region had not experienced a large-scale war. After the northern desert people entered the Subei region, they unilaterally tore up the contract that forbade them from oppressing the people of the Subei region. They burned, killed, looted, and committed all kinds of crimes. When I arrived with the troops, the Subei region had already spontaneously organized a troop to resist the northern desert people. If you really want to count, this troop can be considered the embryonic form of the Subei army. Recalling the past, Shang Junlin's face was expressionless. Shen Yu covered the back of Shang Junlin's hand with her other hand. What about the troops that were originally stationed in the Subei region? They withdrew first. The late emperor had killed many loyal people in his later years. He simply did not care about the life and death of these people. Shang Junlin's voice became cold. The capital was far away from the Subei region. The late emperor was drunk in the imperial palace. How could he have thought that because of his simple decision, so many people would be displaced? Fortunately, Your Majesty was there at that time to save the Subei region from the abyss of suffering, Shen Yu said softly. After I arrived in the Subei region, I reorganized the scattered soldiers and organized them with the local troops spontaneously formed to fight back. It's funny to say that the northern desert people thought that the people of the Great Huan region were easy to bully. They never thought that there would be a day when they would be counterattacked. They were completely defeated in the first battle. Later, more and more people volunteered to join. After fighting for more than a month, the northern desert people surrendered. I did not want to care, and the people of the Subei region were not willing to accept it. I led them to drive the people out of the Great Huan region. Shang Junlin's voice was low. Even if his tone was flat and straightforward, Shen Yu still could not help but follow his words and imagine the situation in the Subei region. Shen Yu knew that things were not as simple as what Shang Junlin said. Shang Junlin did not say much, and Shen Yu did not ask for details. At that time, I was often away from home. Fortunately, Prince Li stabilized the situation in the imperial court. Later, I trained my own people, and Prince Li's presence slowly decreased. I was grateful for his help in the beginning, and most of the time, I turned a blind eye to him. Shang Junlin later thought that he might have made a mistake in this matter. Is Your Majesty on good terms with the other princes? Shen Yu only knew that Shang Junlin and his half-brothers had a bad relationship. Those princes who were a generation older did not seem to like to get close to Shang Junlin. Other than Prince Li and Prince An, I did not interact with the others. Shang Junlin had long passed the age of expecting familial affection. He did not even care about his own father, much less his other uncles. Shen Yu was not surprised. When those princes saw Shang Junlin, they were like mice that saw a cat. At first, he thought that they were scared, but now, it seemed that from the beginning, those people were afraid of Shang Junlin. By my side, there is only a you, Shang Junlin sighed and pulled the youth into his arms. A you cannot leave me. If that day comes, I do not know what I will do. All of his feelings were poured into Shen Yu. Before he fell in love with Shen Yu, he once thought that he could only sit alone on the cold dragon throne for the rest of his life. Shen Yu's arrival showed him a different kind of life. I will not leave. Shen Yu patted the man's back to comfort him. He was puzzled. Why does your majesty always think that I will leave? If I leave your majesty, I have nowhere to go. Shen Yu did not deny that at the beginning, he had thought of leaving. After all the grievances were settled, he would choose a peaceful place to spend the rest of his life. But as he got along with Shang Junlin, this idea unconsciously disappeared. Shang Junlin could not explain the reason. Perhaps it was because of his nature. He had never obtained anything before, so when he suddenly obtained it, it was easy for him to worry about gains and losses. The Northern Desert Imperial family handed the document to Da Huan. They thought that the other party would admit defeat and do as they requested. Unexpectedly, after a few days, their scouts found traces of the Northern Desert Army. What did you say? The Northern Desert Emperor suddenly stood up, his face full of disbelief. This subordinate does not dare to lie. We did find traces of the Northern Desert Army at the border with Da Huan. The soldier who spoke lowered his head, his voice trembling. How is that possible? The Northern Desert Emperor anxiously walked around in circles. Didn't they say that Subei had just experienced a drought? How could Da Huan have the guts to start a war with us? The main reason why the Northern Desert dared to start a war was that Subei had just experienced a drought. In their view, the lack of food supplies was equivalent to a death sentence for the Northern Desert Army. After the disaster relief, the treasury was empty. It was not a wise move to start a war at this time. The Northern Desert Emperor thought that the best development would be for Da Huan to admit defeat and obediently do as they asked. Then they would lead the army to the south and rob Subei. They could use these things to pass the winter. Unexpectedly, Da Huan's reaction was completely different from what they had imagined. The female official who was in charge of negotiating with them was even more powerful. There was no one in the entire Northern Desert who could defeat her. Every time they negotiated, Da Huan's side would emerge victorious. The Northern Desert Emperor had been suppressing his anger for a long time. He originally thought that when they led the army to the south, he would force Da Huan to deal with this woman to vent his anger. What should we do now? A minister frowned and asked. The army had already gathered. They could not give up just because of a little disturbance. If that were to spread, how could they raise their heads in other countries? Since Da Huan refuses to negotiate, don't blame us for starting a war. The Northern Desert Emperor's eyes were filled with malice. At this moment, the Northern Desert Emperor did not know that the Northern Desert Army was already sharpening their swords and waiting for them to come to them. In the past, these Northern Desert people were so cowardly that they could not even fight to their heart's content. This time, we can finally fight to our heart's content. Within the Northern Desert Army, no one was afraid of this war. When they received the order from the imperial court, everyone was excited. The Northern Desert people were already riding on top of their heads. If they did not fight back now, when would they fight back? As expected of the emperor who drove the Northern Desert people out by himself. His response to the Northern Desert people's provocation is really satisfying. War was not a good thing for the people. But for the people of Subei, they were willing to pay any price to fight the Northern Desert people. The blood feud of having their families destroyed was not something that could be easily forgotten. Shang Junlin gave a secret order to He Chengyu, Jiang Huiqing, and Fang Jiari who stayed in Subei. The general meaning was, do whatever you want to do. I will support you from behind. Fang Jiari dared to provoke the people sent by the Northern Desert every time because of this imperial order. The three of them were not stupid. They could see Shang Junlin's attitude towards the Northern Desert from his actions. As ministers, they naturally had to share the emperor's burdens. Therefore, they added fuel to the fire in this war. For example, They deliberately made the Northern Desert people misunderstand that the Northern Desert Army did not have enough pay and was greatly affected by the drought. Another example was Fang Jiari, who made the Northern Desert people so angry in every negotiation that they could not refute. She dared to do this because Your Majesty asked her to do so, right? Shun Yu looked at the document sent back from Subei. It described Fang Jiari's heroic actions during the negotiation. You really knows me. The Northern Desert thinks that this drought is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. How can I not think so? Shang Junlin admitted generously. Your Majesty, do you want to use this opportunity to knock some sense into the Northern Desert, or do you want to get something from them? Shun Yu's question hit the nail on the head. That year, the Northern Desert took Subei from Dahuan. This time, I also want them to bleed. Moreover, the Northern Desert people's actions had already touched Shang Junlin's bottom line. Your Majesty wants the land of the Northern Desert. Shun Yu was surprised. Shang Junlin ordered Eunuch Meng to bring a map and opened it on the table. The land to the north of Subei is very suitable for raising horses. I want to train a cavalry. Cavalry? Shun Yu thought of Shang Junlin's private horse farm. Obviously, this idea did not come out of nowhere. Your Majesty, when did you have this plan? When I fought with the Northern Desert in the past, I suffered losses from their cavalry. Later, I thought about whether I could build a strong cavalry. However, Dahuan lacked too many things. Until now, this wish has not been realized. However, it would be soon. Shun Yu pointed at the circled area on the map. This place is close to Subei. It is convenient to come and go. Your Majesty's wish will be realized soon. Chapter 164. They were confident that they would win the battle against the Northern Desert. Shun Yu flipped open another report on the table. It was from the Ministry of Justice, asking about how to deal with Feng Pingqi. The Feng family's influence had been removed from the center of power in Dahuan. Elder Feng, who used to be in the limelight, had been imprisoned. The officials under his protection who were involved had also been punished. Now, only the Feng family had not been dealt with. Your Majesty, how do you plan to deal with Master Feng? Shun Yu closed the report. Shang Junlin also saw the report and frowned. The Ministry of Justice can convict him on his own. Why are you asking me? Shang Junlin approved. Deal with him according to the law and threw it aside. Speaking of Master Feng, why did he frame Prince An in the first place? Shun Yu walked to Shang Junlin and sat down. He put the hallucinogenic drug next to the flower. If something happened to Shun Yu, the first person Shang Junlin would punish would be Prince An, who sent the flower into the palace. He said it was the other side's idea. Shang Junlin was referring to the people who manipulated Feng Pingqi behind the scenes. That group of people was now imprisoned in the Ministry of Justice's prison. I asked the Ministry of Justice to interrogate those people. They said that because I favored you, they wanted me to have a taste of losing my true love. Shang Junlin's voice was full of coldness. What about when I first entered the palace? Could they have predicted that Your Majesty would fall in love with me in the future? If so, they should have stopped me from entering the palace from the beginning. Shun Yu was puzzled. But the fact was that his entry into the palace was facilitated by these people. Shun Yu could understand why they wanted him to disappear. At that time, Shang Junlin did not hide his love for him. Although at that time, only they knew that there was some sincerity in this love. Outsiders did not know. From their point of view, Shun Yu was favored by the emperor as soon as he entered the palace. Until today, he was still favored by the emperor. Shang Junlin, according to the news from the Ministry of Justice, they were just following orders. The medicine that caused you to fall sick was also given by the mastermind. Shun Yu, can you get information about the prison breakers from these people? Shang Junlin, after Prince Yu was taken away, I had the Ministry of Justice interrogate him, but there was no result. The Minister of Justice was also very troubled recently. His Majesty had given him the matter of Elder Feng to deal with, and the murder of His Majesty had also been implicated. Anyone with eyes could see how much His Majesty valued His Majesty. Because of this, the Minister of Justice did not dare to be careless. Sir, Are we still going to interrogate him today? The subordinate cupped his hands and asked. Interrogate him. We can't relax for even a day before the interrogation results are out. His Majesty has given him to us to deal with. He thinks highly of us. No matter what, we can't let His Majesty down, the Minister of Justice said righteously. Yes. Feng Pingqi was no longer as dignified as he used to be. His hair was messy and fell on his face. His prison uniform was covered with dirt and blood. After a long period of interrogation, he was in a very bad state. I've already told you everything I know. No matter how you interrogate me, I can't tell you the rest. Feng Pingqi's voice was hoarse as he looked at the Minister of Justice who was walking toward him. It was hard to describe the feeling that a former subordinate had become a high and mighty judge. The Minister of Justice waved his hand and his subordinate brought him a whip. At the same time, the same thing was happening on the other side. When dealing with that person, they were not as polite as when dealing with Elder Feng. Shang Junlin did not need to care about how they interrogated him. He only needed to know the final result. Autumn passed and winter came. The weather was getting colder and colder. Shen Yu changed into thick clothes. As Imperial Physician Ji Yu said, he had a much easier time this winter than in previous years. After several probing attacks, the Subei Army and the Northern Desert Army faced each other head-on. The Subei Army caught the Northern Desert Army by surprise. Shang Junlin was very happy when the news of the victory reached the imperial court. The Prince of the Northern Desert was still detained in the capital. After the war between Daheng and the Northern Desert, his life became more and more difficult. If the Northern Desert won, he would still have a chance to return to the Northern Desert. If the Northern Desert won, he would be in danger. The capital was not affected by the war. Every time the news of victory came, the imperial court would reveal it to the people when the time was right. After the war with the Northern Desert, the people were already prepared. The Subei Army deserves to be called the Subei Army. They were able to defeat the Northern Desert people in the past. This time, they can beat them back. They wanted to rob us while the Subei Army was in drought. If you ask me, this war was well fought. We should teach these Northern Desert barbarians a lesson. They even sent people to hide in the Subei Army. Now that things have happened, they are threatening to start a war if we don't let them go. How shameless. With the guidance of the people's newspaper, the direction of public opinion was under control. Shang Junlin got the news from outside the palace and told Shen Yu, I didn't expect that a small newspaper could play such a big role. Your Majesty, don't underestimate the power of the people. In the past, those people took advantage of the information gap between the people and the imperial court to slander Your Majesty. In the future, don't think that this kind of situation will happen again. Shen Yu lowered his eyes and restrained the darkness in his eyes. You is so protective of me. Shang Junlin squeezed Shen Yu's hand. Your Majesty has done such a good thing for the people. We can't let people with malicious intentions slander you. Thinking of how Shang Junlin's reputation had been deliberately ruined in his previous life, Shen Yu felt a wave of displeasure in his heart. The imperial court changed its practice in the past. Everything the emperor did had a reasonable explanation. The appearance of the people's newspaper completely changed the image of the imperial court and Shang Junlin in the eyes of the people. This was an outcome that Shen Yu was happy to see. I sent the hidden dragon guards to Hanju City. Along the way, they found traces of King Yu. But the other party was very cautious. After tracking for a while, the traces disappeared. Shang Junlin said, this means that our guess wasn't wrong. They were indeed planning to go to Hanju City. Shen Yu rubbed the cup in his hand and asked, is there anything special about Hanju City? In the beginning, they all thought that those people would bring King Yu back to his fief. Shang Junlin had sent people to track them down. Hanju City wasn't on the path between the capital and King Yu's fief. So if they went to Hanju City, they would have to take a big detour. It's most likely that there are people in Hanju City waiting for them. Shang Junlin replied. Your Majesty, don't you think that this is a coincidence? Lord Shu's daughter committed a crime in the hunting ground, so Your Majesty sent people to Hanju City to investigate their past. Those people managed to kidnap King Yu with great difficulty, and they were heading to Hanju City. If they knew that your Majesty's men were heading there, what would they think? As long as Shunyu thought about the scene of those people who thought they were foolproof, but in the end, they fell into a trap that had been prepared long ago, he felt it was very interesting. If that's the case, then a Yu is probably their nemesis, right? Every single matter can coincide with them. Shang Junlin was also shocked. Putting the previous matter aside, this matter was too much of a coincidence. That day, he went hunting with Shunyu and met Lord Shu's daughter. Perhaps. Shunyu smiled. As the people involved, Lord Shu's family was imprisoned. Regardless of whether they participated in the assassination or not, they were the ones who brought those people in. So they had to be charged as accomplices. The servant that Lord Fang caught that day said that he was delivering a letter to Mrs. Shu. Did your Majesty find out what she said to Hanju City? Shunyu asked. Shang Junlin replied, according to Mrs. Shu, she wanted Hanju City to cover up what her daughter did in Hanju City. Shunyu replied, with the Shu family's daughter's arrogance, she must have caused quite a bit of trouble. Shang Junlin replied, a Yu's thinking is right. She even has a few murder cases in her hands. Your Majesty found out the results so quickly? Shunyu was shocked. It was the Shu family's daughter. After she was imprisoned, she spoke a lot about the Shu family. I have already sent people to verify it. If what she said is true, then it's time for Hanju City to change. A single sentence easily determined the fate of Hanju City's major forces. The Shu family was imprisoned together. Why did you tell them that? Do you think that you can slander your sister now that we're imprisoned? Mrs. Shu looked at the woman curled up by the wall with hatred. She even dared to do it, so why can't I say it? The woman lifted her head from her arms and looked at Mrs. Shu. Instead of questioning me, why don't you worry about your daughter? She has so many lives on her shoulders, isn't she afraid of vengeful spirits coming for her in the middle of the night? What nonsense are you talking about? Lord Shu unhappily rebuked, Junjun is your sister. She's just a little unruly at most, but how can she have harmed anyone? No matter how unhappy you are with her, you shouldn't slander her like this. So, father doesn't know about this. Then why don't you ask your wife and daughter? How did the Wu family's daughter die 3 years ago? Or, how did the daughter of the Yu family drown to death 2 years ago? There are many similar things. Do you want me to list them out one by one? The woman's lips rose into a mocking arc, knitting his brows. Lord Shu hesitantly looked at the person beside him. Mrs. Shu seemed to have been poked in a sore spot as she jumped up. You believe everything she says. Junjun grew up by your side, so how can you not know her character? There's no need to explain. There are already officials heading to Hanju City, and it will be clear if I'm lying or not when they return. The woman replied indifferently. What's with the noise? You guys like to quarrel the most. The prison guard walked over unhappily. Silence returned to the prison once more. The officials that were sent to Hanju City initially met with resistance, but when they arrived, they realized that the small Hanju City was filled with complicated forces. Although Lord Shu was transferred to the capital, his influence was still significant. So it was harder for them to investigate the Shu family than they had imagined. It was only after the Shu family was implicated in the assassination that they found an opportunity to investigate. As the investigation deepened, shocking cases surfaced one after another. The officials in charge of this matter did not dare to delay and immediately wrote a report and handed it over. Even if they weren't implicated in the assassination, the Shu family still deserves to die. Shang Junlin raged after reading the report. Who was the one that promoted her? The imperial study was silent as Eunuch Meng lowered his head, not daring to speak. None of the officials that came to discuss the matter dared to speak. They never expected that a case of a junior offending the emperor would be implicated in several bloody cases. As the daughter of Hanju City's provincial governor, she was responsible for so many lives, and this was only the investigation so far. It was hard for them not to suspect that the provincial governor and his family played a role in this matter. Prime Minister, I'll leave this matter to you. I want to know how this person was transferred to the capital and if there are any similar cases in the court. Chapter 165. Since ancient times, the imperial court's control over the local regions had always been a headache for those in power. In the late period of the previous emperor's reign, not only was the imperial court affected by his actions, but the local regions were also affected. After Shang Junlin ascended the throne, he first dealt with the imperial court's problems before dealing with the local regions. Until now, most of them could be said to be clean. But there were always exceptions. For example, the Subei officials that were dealt with not long ago, and Hanju City's current problem. In the end, Shang Junlin handed this matter over to the Prime Minister and Lord Duan to deal with. Since there was a problem with the transfer of officials, they would more or less bear some responsibility. The officials that were transferred to the capital had all passed the imperial court's test. The test wasn't just based on the results, but a comprehensive consideration of all aspects. Only those who had the ability and didn't make any major mistakes could be transferred back to the capital. Since Lord Shu was transferred to the capital, it meant that he had passed the test. As for why the matter in Hanju City wasn't discovered, it was a matter for the Prime Minister and Lord Duan to investigate. When Shang Junlin returned to the Yuzhong Palace and saw Shen Yu standing by the window, the anger in his heart dissipated a little. "Your Majesty is back." Shen Yu turned around when he heard footsteps. Shang Junlin walked over without a word and hugged her. "Is there any news from Hanju City today? Have you found traces of the King of Yu?" This was Shen Yu's first reaction. "Not yet. It's the Shu family's matter." That daughter of a concubine was speaking the truth. The Shu family's actions in Hanju City were far more than that. "Your Majesty is angry about this matter?" Shen Yu raised his hand and caressed the man's back. "How can such a person be transferred to the capital? Your Majesty didn't know about it in the first place. But now that you know, he will naturally return to where he should be. Those who make mistakes will receive their due punishment. Your Majesty doesn't have to think too much about it." Shen Yu comforted. With the first clue broken, the following matters were much easier to investigate. Hanju City. What happened during the autumn hunt? Why would Junjun offend the imperial emperor? What's the Shu family's current situation? Madame Shu's family, the Cheng family, fell into a state of panic. When the news came, the Cheng family immediately made their plans. The Cheng family had been rooted in Hanju City for many years, and they were the biggest family in Hanju City. Furthermore, because of their marriage with Mr. Shu, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that they could cover the sky with one hand. If it weren't for their overwhelming power, they wouldn't have been able to force the victim's family to swallow their grievances. On the surface, they were in the limelight, but behind their backs, their hands were stained with the blood of countless innocent people. "Master, what should we do now? The people from the imperial court have already arrived in Hanju City, and with the news from the capital, many people no longer listen to us. What's the point of saying all this now? It's not like you don't know the current emperor's style. Unless he can't find out, none of us can escape with what we've done all these years." The room fell into a deathly silence. After a long while, someone couldn't help but ask, "Is there really no room for negotiation? Where is that lord? Didn't you say that you needed us to temporarily shelter a noble? Our Cheng family has done so many things for him, so he can't just leave us." His voice became softer as he spoke. At this moment, everyone's gaze was focused on the leader. The Cheng family's patriarch closed his eyes and said, "I will contact that lord." Another person stood out and said, "Things haven't reached the worst stage yet, so don't panic." Compared to the cold atmosphere in the Cheng family, those small families that had been suppressed for years were rejoicing. Didn't the Cheng family boast that they were superior to others? If it wasn't for Mr. Shu's protection, would the Cheng family be so arrogant all these years? Now that their umbrella is gone, let's see how long they can be proud of themselves. The imperial court has sent a lord to investigate the matter of the Shu family's daughter. Those who have grievances in their hearts can finally vent their anger. It's also a sin. A good daughter, just because she dressed up a little, she encountered such a thing. It's not just one family, right? Of course it's not just that. What we know is because the Cheng family has some power. Those small families that need to rely on the Cheng family to survive don't dare to say anything even if something happens. Didn't the young miss who was engaged to the Li family's young master hang herself the night before the wedding? Perhaps she was also killed in the dark. I remember that there was a period of time when the Shu family's young master and the Li family's young master were very close. After that young miss passed away, the Li family quickly moved away. I'm afraid there's a big connection between the two. Do you still remember an old incident that happened many years ago? When Mr. Shu took office, he had a family. It was the young miss of the Cheng family. Relying on the Cheng family's power, she insisted on being his concubine. After that, Mrs. Shu changed, and the original Mrs. Shu never appeared in front of anyone again. With the Cheng family's loss of power, those old matters that they didn't dare to talk about in the past were dug up one by one. The Cheng family had been domineering for many years. It was fine when they were at their peak, but once they fell, there were many people who hit them when they were down. Not to mention those who had grudges in the past. With such a good opportunity in front of them, how could they miss it? After the initial difficulties, the officials sent by the imperial court to Hanju City made rapid progress. The cases of the Shu family and Cheng family flew to the capital like snowflakes. I have underestimated them. They're just a local aristocratic family, and they can actually do so much. Shang Junlin looked at the reports from Hanju City with a cold expression. It's normal for them to have guts when they're far away from the capital and have someone backing them. Shunyu sat on the couch and smiled. The further away they are from the imperial city, the easier it is for such things to happen. Power nurtured people's desires. When there's no external force to restrain them, it would eventually drag them to the abyss. The Cheng family can't be allowed to stay. Shang Junlin made a decision in his heart. Your Majesty, why don't you wait a little longer? The people who kidnapped King Yu might be bringing him to Hanju City, and their destination might be the Cheng family. Along the way, the hidden dragon guards did not find any traces of them. So why don't we just wait for them at their destination? Shen Yu only recalled it 2 days ago. When King Yu rebelled in his previous life, the Cheng family was his loyal supporters. It was said that they had sought refuge with King Yu a long time ago. But what about now? Regardless of whether they had colluded or not, the Cheng family was still an anchor point. If their destination is Hanju City, and if it wasn't for the Shu family, the Cheng family would be able to protect King Yu when they reach Hanju City. Shun Yu continued. According to Yu's words, those people must not have heard of it beforehand. Now that my men have already started to move, will they still follow the original plan? Shang Junlin was doubtful. But they have no other choice. Shun Yu smiled. They must have sensed the presence of the hidden dragon guards. How long can they hide like this? They have so many people, and they must have supplies. In their original plan, Hanju City was their supply point. So even if they know that there's a trap, they can only bite the bullet and charge in. The truth was just as Shun Yu had thought. The middle-aged man brought King Yu all the way. After a period of time, King Yu had recovered a little. However, the journey was bumpy, and he had to avoid being discovered. Hence, he could only eat and drink sparingly. Aside from the time in the prison, King Yu had never suffered such grievances. The Emperor has already sent men to Hanju City. Wouldn't we be walking into a trap if we go over? King Yu asked as he sat by the door in the dilapidated temple. Do you think that after so many days, your fiefdom is still under your control like it was before? If you go back directly, you will be walking into a trap. The middle-aged man unhappily said. Where are you guys bringing me? After so many days, no matter how slow-witted the King of Yu was, he could sense that something was wrong. These people did not treat him with respect at all, and they were never willing to listen to him. He thought that he had escaped with his life, but after going around in circles, he was still under their control. Your Highness, you will know when we get there. Don't worry, we will not harm you. King Yu was not at ease at all. He hated the feeling of being controlled. You guys saved me, but what's next? What else can I do if I can't return to my fief? Your Highness, you don't have to be anxious. There are some things that you can do even if you don't return to your fief, as long as that person did not say what it was. Aside from the war with the Northern Desert, the most discussed topic in the capital was the Ministry of Works Assessment. The date was delayed for a period of time due to various reasons, but it finally started under everyone's anticipation. Shun Yu was interested in the first assessment. After it ended, he asked Shang Junlin about it. Shun Yu, Your Majesty, how many people did the Ministry of Works recruit this time? Shang Junlin, a total of 48 people were recruited. 12 of them were officially recruited. They are all outstanding in a certain aspect. Currently, these 12 people have chosen to work in the Ministry of Works. Other than that, there are also 36 candidates. They will be tested for a period of time. If they are suitable, they will be decided. Shun Yu, who thought of this idea? Shang Junlin, it was the Minister of Revenue. For this assessment, the Minister of Works always went to the Ministry of Rights. The Minister of Rights was annoyed, so he called the other ministers every time. Except for the Minister of Revenue, who was always there, the others found all kinds of excuses to decline after being invited twice. Shun Yu, this idea is quite good. Shang Junlin, some of the remaining people are illiterate. Illiterate people are troublesome, so the Minister of Works intends to use this time to teach them some basic words. In Da Huan, those who could read more or less had some family background. Because the cost of printing books was too high, the price of books was also very high. People who didn't have a family background couldn't afford to buy them. I remember that a Yu asked his subordinates to sell basic literacy books at a low price. Many people in the capital bought them. After all, compared to the normal price of other books, this book with little content was ridiculously cheap. Many people bought one and put it at home. It was more convenient for them to learn to read than to let others do it for them. It's good that people bought it. I was planning to let them do some activities and sell more if there weren't many people buying it. Shun Yu picked up the tea on the table and took a sip. Did the aristocratic families realize that something is wrong? There are too many things going on in the court recently. They can't take care of this. Even if they realize, they won't have time to deal with it. That's good. It's best to wait for them to take it seriously. When the dust has settled, they won't be able to do anything. Ordinary people could also afford to read books. What could the aristocratic families use to be superior? Chapter 166. Now that the Ministry of Works assessment was completed, they only needed to wait for time to verify the feasibility of this method. After that, they would be able to spread it to the whole of Da Huan. Then, they could start preparing for another plan. Before that, they needed to let more people of Da Huan learn how to read. However, this was not something that could be accomplished in a short period of time. The changes in the imperial court were most directly felt by the people in the capital. The appearance of the people's newspaper deepened their understanding of the Great Huan dynasty. The more they understood, the stronger their sense of belonging. The people's hearts were united, and there were only benefits to the development of the Great Huan dynasty. In the quiet afternoon, Shun Yu sat on the swing in the courtyard and basked in the sun. The warm sunlight shone on his body, bringing a burst of warmth. He was holding a storybook in his hand. It was one of the most popular storybooks outside the palace. It was written based on him and Shang Junlin. It was sandwiched in a pile of other storybooks and was dug out by Shun Yu. Shun Yu originally thought that with Shang Junlin's temperament, he wouldn't let this kind of thing spread among the people. After flipping through a few pages, Shun Yu roughly understood. This novel didn't have the original explicit description, but the relationship between the two was very delicate. Compared to the original novel, it was more touching. Shun Yu was unknowingly immersed in the novel. He didn't even notice Shang Junlin walking over. The golden sunlight shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves and fell on the young man. The breeze blew the leaves and the light spots jumped with the wind. The young man sat on the swing made of green vines. His eyes were lowered as he focused on the book in his hand. Time was quiet and beautiful. Seeing this scene, Shang Junlin's heart calmed down. The palace servants wanted to greet him, but he raised his hand to stop them. Mushi, pass that plate of chestnut cakes to me. While speaking, Shun Yu's eyes never left the book in his hand. After waiting for a while, the chestnut cakes appeared in his sight. The hand that picked them up obviously didn't belong to a woman. Shen Yu looked up and met a pair of smiling eyes. Why didn't anyone inform me that Her Majesty was coming? Shen Yu was stunned. Shang Junlin fed the chestnut cake to his mouth. I saw that you were so engrossed, so I didn't let them disturb you. What are you looking at? Why are you so engrossed? Shen Yu took a bite of the pastry. The sweet taste spread in his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and said, Mr. Qing Li wrote the story well. Qing Li, a person who had the guts to write a novel based on the emperor and the nobles. As soon as the name came out, Shang Junlin knew what Shen Yu was looking at. He walked over and sat beside Shen Yu. He held a small plate with chestnut cakes in his hand and fed Shen Yu from time to time. Yu likes his work? Shang Junlin asked. The writing is very moving. This book is sold very well outside the palace, right? Shen Yu didn't forget that he had found this book from a pile of popular novels. The novels sent to Shen Yu's palace were specially bought by palace servants. They would be distributed according to popularity. Shen Yu would often start reading from the most popular novels. People are very curious about things that they can't see. Although this book doesn't say it explicitly, people who read it all think that it's talking about you and me. Shang Junlin didn't deny it. Shen Yu closed the book and turned to look at Shang Junlin. I thought that Your Majesty wouldn't allow such a novel to be circulated among the people. What's wrong with letting everyone know that I love you deeply? Shang Junlin said lightly. Shen Yu didn't expect that this was the reason why Shang Junlin allowed the novel to be circulated. Your Majesty, have you seen Mr. Qing Li? What does you want to do? This person's writing style is very good. It's a waste of his talent to only write novels. Your Majesty, why don't you recruit him to do something for the people? The People's Daily was a newspaper sponsored by the imperial court. It was directly under the emperor's name. Recruiting him to be the chief writer of the People's Daily was considered giving him a proper position in the imperial court. I asked someone to ask him. He said that he didn't want to be restrained and writing novels is good. For some reason, Shen Yu didn't find it strange. People who dared to write novels for the emperor couldn't be judged by common sense. Since the person was unwilling, Shen Yu didn't say more. Your Majesty, try this chestnut cake. It tastes good. Under the influence of Shen Yu, the cooks in Yuzhang Palace were very keen on studying delicacies, especially all kinds of pastries. After the results of the examination of the Ministry of Works came out, some people were happy and some were sad. Those who passed the examination began to pack up and prepare to work in the Ministry of Works. The Ministry of Works was now short of people. The Minister of the Ministry of Works waved his hand and recruited those who passed the examination. Several cement roads had been paved in the capital. After the roads were paved, many people admired them and became officials. The money needed to pave the roads was sponsored by several tycoons in the capital. After the roads were paved, the tycoons were given the right to name the roads after discussion. This was a great honor for the businessmen. In addition, there would be a small tablet on each road with the sponsor's information written on it. In the Yingxing Tower, the largest restaurant in the capital, several businessmen gathered together. Yang Zheng, who had returned to the capital, was also among them. Now the roads built by the imperial court have tablets with our information engraved on them. In the past, who would have thought that there would be such a day? Yes, I heard that the imperial court is still preparing the stone tablet with the list of the people who assisted Subei. Boss Yang, do you have any inside information? A businessman raised his wine glass. Now, they were all guessing that Yang Zheng, this foreign businessman, had some important official behind him. Otherwise, how could he know so much inside information? Yang Zheng clinked his glass with his and drank the wine in it. The news I received is that the roads will be repaired before the new year. At that time, the promised rewards will also be given out. Also, after this year, the imperial court will probably revise the new commercial law. Yang Zheng's words were like a sudden clap of thunder in everyone's ears. Even Boss Jin couldn't help but show a surprised expression. Is this true? Revise the commercial law? In what way will it be changed? Actually, it's quite good. For us businessmen, it's already much better than the previous dynasty. Brother Yang, do you have more accurate information? Boss Jin asked in a low voice. Boss Jin, don't worry. The new commercial law will only be more beneficial to us than the previous one. I'm not too sure about the other details. The imperial court has only proposed an idea. As for the specifics, it needs to be discussed by all the ministers before a decision can be made. Yang Zheng naturally knew about this because Shun Yu revealed it to him. Shun Yu had previously mentioned this matter to Shang Junlin, and Shang Junlin was very tempted. The information from Hanju City was sent back to the imperial court, and every piece of evidence proved the truth of the Shu family's daughter's words. With conclusive evidence, the Shu and Cheng families were finished. Your Majesty said that Lord Shu had no idea about what Madame Shu and Shu Wanjuan did. The flickering candlelight illuminated the beauty's face. Shang Junlin put down his pen and stared at Shun Yu's face for a while. Your Majesty, why are you looking at me? Shun Yu touched his face. Is there something on my face? No matter how many times I look at a you will always move my heart. Shang Junlin raised his hand. Come over to me. Shun Yu walked over. He had changed into a set of pajamas, but the simple clothes didn't reduce his elegance. On the contrary, it highlighted his exquisite face. Shang Junlin hugged Shun Yu in his embrace and smelled the fragrance of Shun Yu's hair. His irritation from the imperial court was instantly swept away. Shu Linhua had no idea about Shu Wanjuan's murder in Hanju City. When Shu Wanjuan and her son's crimes were announced, the shock on his face didn't seem fake. After the Shu family was interrogated, the results of the interrogation also confirmed this. How did they manage to hide such a huge matter from Shu Linhua? With so many murders, it's impossible for him to not have heard about it, right? Shun Yu felt that it was inconceivable. I don't know what Madame Shu and the Cheng family did, but Shu Linhua trusted them greatly. In addition to the Cheng family's coercion, the victims didn't dare to make a big deal out of it. The officials that relied on Shu Linhua didn't dare to speak, and they all thought that Shu Linhua knew about it. Since their boss knew about it, who would want to bring trouble to themselves by revealing what their boss's daughter did? Furthermore, they received benefits from the Cheng family. For the sake of those benefits, they just closed their eyes and didn't speak about it. Shun Yu could hear the sarcasm in Shang Junlin's voice and rubbed his face. Now that the matter has been exposed, those who chose to keep their mouths shut have now become accomplices. I wonder if they regret their choice. No matter what they were thinking, it had already happened. It was useless to regret now. After all, people had to be responsible for their own actions. Hanju City wasn't big, and it wasn't like Subei, where a single move could affect the entire situation. Changing a few officials was a simple matter. After the truth was found out, those guilty would be demoted, and the law of Great Huan Dynasty clearly stated how they should be dealt with. Shang Junlin caressed Shun Yu's hair. The Prime Minister has also found out the truth and transferred them back to the capital. It's because Shu Linhua's resume was outstanding, and there hasn't been any major incidents in Hanju City, so they didn't investigate further. A moment of carelessness nearly led to a huge mistake. They can cover the sky with their hands in Hanju City, so it's normal for the news not to spread out. Even Hanju City itself didn't dare to speak about it, so how could it spread out? If it wasn't for the offense of the Shu family's daughter, and His Majesty sent someone to Hanju City to investigate, this matter might have been hidden forever. Shun Yu leaned back. In his previous life, Shun Yu had never heard of this matter. Until the end, the Cheng family was still living well, and Shu Linhua had always been in Hanju City. It was only until he sought refuge with King Yu that he left Hanju City for the capital. Shu Linhua never expected that his daughter, who he had always thought to be obedient and unruly, would do so many terrible things behind his back. When he returned to the prison, he was still in a daze. After Shu Wanjuan and her son were tortured, their spirits were dispirited. Only the Shu family's daughter had a bizarre light flickering in her eyes. She had been waiting for this day for a long time. As the days passed, the Cheng family's deeds were exposed one after another. Countless people with hatred in their hearts couldn't wait to pounce on them and devour their flesh. The Cheng family was like ants on a hot pan as they ran around in circles. Big brother, did that lord reply? What should we do now? Don't tell me that you're just going to sit here and wait for your death and your family's destruction. It's in the next 2 days. That lord's men will be here soon. We will leave when they arrive. Leave? Aside from Hanju City, where else can we go? The imperial court's decision has yet to be announced, so we have to leave before it's announced. Otherwise, we won't be able to leave even if we want to. That lord said that someone will be coming to pick us up. But wouldn't they become fugitives if that was the case? At night, King Yu's group secretly appeared in front of the Cheng family's manor. A servant knocked on the door of the Cheng family's patriarch. Old master, the guests are here. The Cheng family's patriarch put on his clothes and got off the bed. At the same time, the hidden dragon guards that were guarding the Cheng family also noticed the commotion. Chapter 167. Knowing that the emperor had sent someone to Hanju City, King Yu's group changed their original plan. They initially wanted to head straight to the Cheng family. With the Cheng family's position in Hanju City, there was no place safer than the Cheng family. But after the incident, the Cheng family was no longer safe. Currently, the imperial court was investigating Shu Wanjuan's matter. The Cheng family had been in Hanju City for many years, and they had been keeping a low profile. If it wasn't for Shu Wanjuan, they wouldn't have been exposed so quickly. Didn't the mastermind want to use a safer method? But time was tight, and the imperial court was chasing after them, so they had no other choice. The hidden dragon guards were operating in the dark, and the ones participating in the operation were the imperial army. Don't think that the imperial army is just for the children of officials. The Great Huan imperial army in the past can be said like this, but the imperial army in Shang Junlin's hands is not. This is the army that followed him to war first. It is the army that really fought on the battlefield. Those who want to join the imperial army later have to go through many tests. Only those who are outstanding enough will be selected. The imperial army wasn't a bunch of idiots, and it wasn't easy to escape from them. If they hadn't arranged an assassination to divert their attention, it was most likely that they wouldn't even be able to leave the imperial city. So even if they knew that it wasn't safe in Hanju City, they could only take a gamble. When the mastermind knew that Shu Wanjuan had offended the emperor during the autumn hunt and attracted the imperial court to Hanju City, he was so furious that he smashed his cup. His foolproof plan had gone wrong because of a fool. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in the capital, he would have killed them. Since the Cheng family was no longer safe, they could only look for another place. Fortunately, the Cheng family had many properties, and it wasn't difficult for them to pick one that wasn't known to outsiders. In the end, they chose a remote one in Hanju City. The Cheng family's patriarch knew that there would be guests coming, so he didn't head over immediately. Instead, he gathered those with authority in the family for a discussion. Now that they're here, what should we do? The Cheng family had been in Hanju City for many years, and it wasn't easy for them to give up. After all, no one wanted to give up their luxurious life for an uncertain future. Aside from a few people, no one else in the Cheng family knew about this matter. Is our Cheng family going to fall apart because of an unknown person? You should ask Shu Wanjuan about this. If it wasn't for her, would we have to get ourselves involved? The love he had once doted on her instantly ceased to exist when it came to benefits. She is the daughter of the patriarch's younger sister. She has been spoiled since she was young. Her temper is fine in her own territory, but she is still like this in the capital. Sooner or later, she will harm others and herself. I said that I should discipline her properly, but you all said that I couldn't get along with a junior. Enough, let's not talk about it anymore. Seeing the ugly expression on the clan head's face, someone tried to dissuade him. It has already happened. What's the point of saying all this? If you have time to talk about this, why don't you think about what we should do next? Although it hasn't spread to us yet, if those lords continue to investigate, they will find us sooner or later. We don't have a choice, do we? The study fell into silence. What did that lord say? After a while, someone asked. He said that he can't go against the imperial court for the time being. He wants us to meet up with that guest first and leave with them. Patriarch Cheng rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. There are so many people and so many things in the Cheng clan. Are we all going to give up? If we make a big move, the imperial court will definitely notice it, The meaning behind Patriarch Cheng's words was clear. In the middle of the night, Patriarch Cheng changed his clothes and quietly left the Cheng clan residence to head to the villa. He knew more than the other members of the Cheng clan and knew who the guest was. Now that such a huge matter had happened to the Cheng clan, it was impossible to protect them. Since that was the case, he might as well change his tune and join another master. King Yu. He was the successor of the previous emperor. If he joined King Yu, he would have made a contribution to the throne. What did it matter if he lost this little bit now? He needed to meet that person first. In the villa, King Yu finally found a relatively safe place and could have a good night's sleep. Who knew that not long after he fell asleep, he was woken up by someone who said that someone was here to see him. No matter how dissatisfied he was, he didn't dare to show it on his face. This period of escaping had changed his temperament once more. If it was in the past, he could still be praised as an elegant young master. But now, the malicious look on his face made him look completely different from that description. King Yu got out of bed and met with Patriarch Cheng. "Greetings, Your Highness. Your Highness has suffered during this period of time." Patriarch Cheng was respectful towards King Yu. King Yu, who hadn't received such treatment for a long time, calmed down and helped Patriarch Cheng up. "There's no need for such formalities. I will still have to rely on Patriarch Cheng this time." One was complimenting the other, while the other was enjoying it. The atmosphere between the two of them was good. Before dawn, Patriarch Cheng quietly returned to the Cheng clan residence. He had no idea that his every move was being watched by the hidden dragon guards. King Yu and his group settled down in Hanju City for the time being. As for where to go next, they had to wait for instructions from the person behind the scenes. When the news from the hidden dragon guards reached the imperial city, Shang Junlin placed the secret letter aside and said to Shen Yu, "Shang Junyu has arrived in Hanju City. Have the hidden dragon guards found their tracks?" Shen Yu placed the book in his hand on the shelf. Just when he was about to change the book, he turned around and asked. Shang Junlin replied, "They have colluded with the Cheng family." Shen Yu asked, "The Cheng family is Lord Shu's in-laws?" Shang Junlin replied, "That's right." Shen Yu asked, "Is it really related to them? Did Madame Shu know anything about the assassination?" Shang Junlin replied, "She didn't know. She didn't even know that the people around her would pass the information to the assassins. When the Ministry of Justice told her about it, she even felt that they were slandering her." Shen Yu asked, "When does Your Highness plan to take action?" Shang Junlin replied, "Let's wait a little longer. They must have someone to receive them. I want to know where they have other bases." Shen Yu replied, "If they can have people in the capital, they must have people in other places as well." The weather was getting colder. After the winter rain, the temperature dropped. The palace was already on fire. If it wasn't necessary, Shen Yu wouldn't go out. Nothing major happened in the capital. The courtiers' attention was still on Subei. The war with the northern desert was what they were most concerned about. Next was the assassination case and the prison break of King Yu. As Lord Fang's investigation went deeper, the courtiers also found out that the two cases were done by the same force. In the morning court, Fang Jun took a step forward and said, "I think that the force behind King Yu needs to be thoroughly investigated. This time, in order to save King Yu, they tried to assassinate Your Highness. What will they do next time? Shouldn't they support King Yu to ascend the throne?" As soon as he finished speaking, the hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Fang Jun's words were quite rebellious, but what he said was exactly what the courtiers were worried about. They dared to break the prison and attempt an assassination. Was their next step to change the dynasty? No one wanted to see this result. If King Yu succeeded in his rebellion, they would become courtiers of the previous dynasty. Since ancient times, how many courtiers had a good ending? Even if it was for themselves, they couldn't let this happen. After a long time, a courtier stood up and said, "I think that Lord Fang is right. This matter must be thoroughly investigated." Following that, more and more courtiers stood up and agreed with Fang Jun's actions. At this moment, the competition with King Yu and the force behind him was brought to the surface. Since everyone thinks that a thorough investigation should be carried out, Fang Jun, you will be in charge of this matter. From now on, King Yu's title will be temporarily revoked. If King Yu is found to be innocent, I will compensate him. If King Yu really has the intention to rebel, don't blame me for not considering our brotherhood. Shang Junlin's words made the final conclusion for this matter. In addition to Fang Jun, Shang Junlin also pointed to several officials from the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to cooperate in the case. He also sent officials and troops to King Yu's fief. Since the title was revoked, the fief should naturally return to the hands of the imperial court. Prison break, assassination, raising private soldiers. King Yu's crimes were announced one by one, confirming the suspicion that he was disloyal. Overnight, Shang Junyu went from a proud son of heaven to a traitor who was hated by everyone. I didn't expect King Yu to be such a person behind the scenes. I thought he was a gentle prince. I was really blind. What King Yu? He's not anymore. However, this person's character is really bad. It's said that he provoked the daughters of several courtiers at the same time. After being found out, he refused to admit it. It happened at the Yingxing Tower, right? Many people saw it. For the sake of those girls' reputations, they didn't say anything. Sure enough, no matter how much he pretends, he will be exposed one day. Do you still remember the rumors that slandered His Majesty? It was King Yu who spread them. So, he has been plotting for a long time? He should take a look at himself. How can he compare himself to His Majesty? Such a person who acts one way on the surface and another behind the scenes can only become a prince because he was born into a good family. For a time, King Yu's reputation among the people was extremely bad. On the contrary, Shang Junlin's reputation was even better. The people were convinced that the bad things in the past were deliberately made up by King Yu to slander His Majesty. There were also many scholars who wrote articles to reprimand themselves for believing the rumors. They promised that they would have their own judgment in the future and would no longer follow the crowd. There was a new trend among the scholars. Countless articles praising the current His Majesty appeared. This was something that no one expected. After Shun Yu heard about it, he joked, "How does His Majesty feel now?" He put his hands under his chin and looked up at Shang Junlin. His eyes were full of smiles. In addition to the people's newspaper, the imperial court published another newspaper. It was published in cooperation with Shun Yu's bookstore. It was used to record some interesting stories among the people and accept contributions from the people of Dahuan. It also introduced some good quality goods that were sold cheaply. It was very popular among the people. During this period, most of the articles that appeared in the newspaper were either scolding Shang Junyu or praising Shang Junlin. The contrast was very obvious. Shang Junlin was reviewing the memorials. When he heard this, he raised his other hand and pinched Shun Yu's face. "Are you laughing at me?" Shun Yu shook his head, his eyes sparkling. "No way. I'm just happy for His Majesty." Shang Junlin let go of his hand and stroked His Majesty's cheek for a while. Then, he pinched His Majesty's chin, leaned over and kissed His Majesty's lips. "This is all because of a you." The murmur disappeared from his lips. The kiss gradually deepened. Chapter 168. Under the candlelight, the two shadows gradually overlapped. At some point, Shun Yu had changed his position. The booklet on the table was swept to the ground by his sleeve. At this moment, no one cared. Shun Yu sat in Shang Junlin's embrace and raised his head slightly. His fair and slender fingers were placed on his black clothes, clenching tightly together with the man's movements. Like a lotus leaf swaying in the wind and rain. The night was getting darker. Hanju City also received the news that the imperial court had issued an arrest warrant. In order to avoid being discovered, King Yu and his entourage had been holed up in the manor. The news they received was brought to them by the Cheng family's patriarch. "The imperial court has issued an arrest warrant. I'm afraid there's no safe place in Great Huan. Can your highness still return to your fief?" The Cheng family's patriarch's calm appearance was filled with anxiety. He knew that King Yu had escaped from prison, and he also knew that this day would come sooner or later. He just didn't expect it to come so soon. Although the Cheng family had no other choice now, The Cheng family head couldn't accept the fact that they were following a traitor in the eyes of outsiders. There are soldiers in my fief. I've already sent a message to them to gather with us. I can't return to my fief for the time being. Since the emperor has issued an order to pin the crime of rebellion on me, it's impossible for him to let me return to my fief. King Yu was now in a dilemma. Most of his forces were in his fief, and there was no one by his side that he could use. He had already been convicted of treason, and it was impossible for him to return to the imperial city. If he did, he would only be walking into a trap and dying. Since Shang Junlin was so heartless, then don't blame him for being unjust. The crime of rebellion fell on his head. So what if he confirmed it? It was Shang Junlin who forced him to do it, wasn't it? He just wanted to protect himself. How many men do you have here? King Yu turned his head and asked the middle-aged man standing beside him. What does your highness want to do? The middle-aged man's eyes flashed. Isn't what I want to do what you've always wanted me to do? Why is Mr. Tan pretending? King Yu said unhappily. It's good that your highness can think it through. I and the forces behind me will serve your highness. Mr. Tan smiled and stroked his beard. My Cheng family is also willing to serve your highness. The Cheng family head also expressed his loyalty. Since they've decided to revolt, Emperor Yu's side swiftly took action. The Cheng family's influence in Hanju City wasn't small, and many officials in Hanju City had connections with them. Hence, they suddenly revolted and took control of half of the forces in Hanju City. The officials sent by the imperial court were locked up by them, and the King of Yu's group was officially stationed in Hanju City as their stronghold. When the people that received them in Hanju City received the news, they entered Hanju City. It was a group of several thousand people, and the highest-ranking general in Hanju City was the son-in-law of the Cheng family. He had always followed the Cheng family, and now that the Cheng family had sided with the King of Yu, he had also rebelled. His subordinates who opposed him were all killed in public. Under such bloody methods, no one dared to take the risk. Hanju City had completely changed. The King of Yu sent a message to his men. These men were arranged by him in the early years, and not all of them were in the fief. When they received the news, they immediately rushed over to Hanju City. At the same time, Mr. Tan's men also entered Hanju City. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of troops had gathered in Hanju City. This winter was destined to not be peaceful. The news from Hanju City to the capital was blocked, and Shang Junlin received the news through the hidden dragon guards. The King of Yu has rebelled. Shang Junlin closed his fingers, and the piece of paper crumbled to the ground. What? Shun Yu stood up in shock. The King of Yu has rebelled. After the shock, Shun Yu didn't find it strange. The King of Yu had always had thoughts of rebelling, and he was just carrying out his plan. When they arrived in Hanju City, they knew about the imperial court's arrest warrant and colluded with the Cheng family to take control of Hanju City. The officials sent by the imperial court were nowhere to be found, and the hidden dragon guards only managed to send out the news after losing half of their men. Shang Junlin's tone was cold. What's the situation in Hanju City? Shun Yu knitted his brows in worry. The garrison of Hanju City has rebelled. Adding in the troops that came from nowhere, Hanju City now has an army of 80,000. The hidden dragon guards said that there's still an endless stream of troops entering Hanju City. The King of Yu had attacked them at the wrong time, and if it weren't for the news from the hidden dragon guards, they would have known about it even later. Thus, Shang Junlin immediately gathered the ministers for a meeting. When the ministers heard the news from Hanju City, they all sucked in a cold breath. No one had expected that the King of Yu would have the guts to rebel. Where did the King of Yu get so many troops from? One of the ministers was baffled. The King of Yu had the authority to raise an army, but the scale was small. With the King of Yu's rank, he could only raise 2,000 soldiers. But the current situation was that the King of Yu had more than 80,000 soldiers, and the number was still increasing. Where did these soldiers come from? Many of the ministers had the same question in their hearts. Since he already had the intention of rebelling, it's not surprising for him to raise an army. Right now, we have to deal with the matter of the King of Yu. The Prime Minister brought the topic back. The Prime Minister is right. The king of Yu has been convicted, but the northern province is still at war with the northern desert. Who should we send to quell the rebellion? Because of the previous emperor, the Great Huan dynasty didn't have many capable generals. They couldn't possibly send the emperor himself, right? After all, it wasn't that serious. I have someone in mind to quell the rebellion. Apart from Hanju City, we still have to worry about whether there will be problems in Yuju. Shang Junlin said calmly. Yuju was the king of Yu's fief. Shang Junlin had originally sent people to temporarily take over Yuju. Now that the king of Yu was rebelling, Yuju wouldn't be peaceful. Yuju is rich, and it's also the fief that the previous emperor left for the king of Yu. The king of Yu won't give it up so easily. The imperial court must prepare early. First, let the soldiers in the surrounding areas guard them. If they find any troublemakers, take care of them on the spot. The imperial court must also send people over as soon as possible. Yuju. The king of Yu's crime of rebellion was announced, and Yuju fell into chaos. The king of Yu had been operating in Yuju for many years and had deep connections with the local powers. If the king of Yu's crime was true, they wouldn't be able to escape from the consequences. What should we do now? All the major powers of Yuju gathered together to discuss the big issue. His Highness didn't come back for so long because he was trapped in the capital city. Now that the capital city is forcing him to rebel, we are indebted to him. Of course, we can't abandon him at a time like this. You're right. His Highness has been doing his job all these years. Under his rule, Yuju has been thriving. Without the king of Yu, we wouldn't be where we are today. No matter what, we have to stand behind the king of Yu. The minister's worries were not without reason. For themselves and for their own interests, the powers in the fief of the king of Yu wouldn't easily cut ties with him. Fortunately, the imperial court reacted in time and the small-scale rebellion was suppressed. Shang Junlin appointed a general to lead the army to fight against the king of Yu. The weather was getting colder. Shun Yu stood under the porch with a thick cloak wrapped around him. The fluffy collar made his face look even smaller. The war with the northern desert people is ending soon, right? Shun Yu reached out his hand and a snowflake fell on his hand. It melted quickly. Shang Junlin hugged him from behind. Soon. The colder the weather is, the harder it will be for the northern desert people to hold on. The war with the northern desert people had been in a stalemate for more than a month. It was time to end it. In the blink of an eye, I have known your majesty for almost a year. Shun Yu retracted his gaze and lowered his eyes to hide the emotions in his eyes. Shang Junlin, it's only been a year. A Yu will spend every year with me in the future. Shun Yu, how's the situation in Hanju? Because of the incident in Hanju, the Shu family, who should have been punished, were still in prison, waiting for the final judgment. Shang Junlin, the city gate is closed. The king of Yu has been holed up in the city and refused to fight. Shun Yu, with so many people in Hanju, how long can the food last? The king of Yu can't possibly hide in there forever. Shang Junlin, this is a problem he has to consider. I just want to find the person behind him as soon as possible. The backup plan left by the previous emperor was always a thorn in Shang Junlin's heart. Hanju City. The king of Yu never expected that Shang Junlin would act so quickly. It was so fast that he was trapped in Hanju City before he had time to prepare. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. The king of Yu was forced to do something beyond his ability. Right now, he only had troops and nothing else. Fortunately, the Cheng family was willing to pay, and Hanju City was under their control. Thus, he didn't have to worry about the provisions for the time being. However, this wasn't a long-term plan. With Hanju City surrounded, the people outside couldn't enter, and the people inside couldn't leave. His main force was in his fief, and the situation was unclear. Your Highness. Oh, it's Mr. Tan. Shang Junyu stood with his hands behind his back. At this moment, these people were more respectful to him. How's the situation outside? It's still the same. Mr. Tan shook his head. Back then, this king said that he wanted to leave before the imperial court reacted, but Mr. Tan refused to admit it. Could it be that you also expected us to be trapped in Hanju City? The King of Yu couldn't hold back the anger in his heart. After discovering the traces of the hidden dragon guards in Hanju City, the King of Yu wanted to leave with his troops. However, he was stopped by Mr. Tan, who told him to wait a little longer until the imperial court sent an army over. If he hadn't been rescued by Mr. Tan and the others, he would have suspected that Shang Junlin's men were playing with him. Why are you in such a hurry, Your Highness? The imperial court is currently being restrained by the northern desert, so how many people can they spare? Our spies have already scouted the area. There are at most 50,000 troops outside, which is half of our men. If we want to leave, do you think that they can stop us? This king advises you not to look down on Shang Junlin. There are plenty of examples of him winning with fewer troops in the past. Among Shang Junlin's achievements, the one that was talked about the most was how he won with fewer troops. He was the one who defeated the invaders in the Great Huan dynasty in exchange for years of peace. Your Highness, you don't have to worry about it. If we want to succeed, how can we rely on our men? Didn't Your Highness send a message to your men? When they arrive, the show will officially begin. Shang Juanyue's eyes flickered. Mr. Tan is right. This king was too anxious. I'm only worried that the citizens of Hanju City will be unhappy if we are trapped for too long. Until now, Shang Junyu still had no idea how many trump cards these people had. They might seem to be helping him, but their motives weren't that pure. Shang Junyu was brought out of the prison in a hurry, so he didn't have many people around him. If he wanted to succeed, he could only rely on Mr. Tan and the people behind him. As for the future, it wouldn't be too late to talk about it after everything was done. They're just ants. If they're disobedient, we'll just kill them. Mr. Tan wasn't bothered. Chapter 169. Actually, it's a good thing for us this time. The northern desert is holding back the main forces of the imperial court. Isn't Mr. Tan worried that the northern desert will win? If so, wouldn't the first thing I do after ascending the throne be to surrender to the northern desert? Shang Junyu was unhappy. How can those arrogant people of the northern desert compare to the northern desert army? Maybe the northern desert army will also celebrate your success, Mr. Tan said. Mr. Tan seems to know the people of the northern desert very well. Shang Junlin asked casually. I've had some dealings with them. Your Highness doesn't have to worry about that. Even if we lose, we can just give the northern desert back to them. Shang Junyu didn't say anything else. He had seen how the previous emperor was cursed by the people of Dahuan for giving up the northern desert. Even if such a day really came, he would never let this crime fall on his head. As if reading his mind, Mr. Tan continued, even if you have to give up Subei when the time comes, so what? This war wasn't started because of you. When the time comes, you'll be the victor. Is it hard to change the world's views? Mr. Tan is right. Are we still waiting? Can Mr. Tan tell us what we are waiting for? King Yu didn't want to be an ignorant person. Of course, we are waiting for someone who can help us win. Mr. Tan didn't want to say more. The army sent by the imperial court didn't just surround Hanju and do nothing. Before they set off, they were specifically told that the enemy might not only be in Hanju City, but also in other places. Therefore, in addition to the army surrounding the city, the general in charge of quelling the rebellion also sent out some people to look for suspicious people. Especially in the west. Hanju was a vast place. Only the west side was backed by rolling mountains. The army that entered Hanju City had entered through this place. The mountains were sparsely populated, making it easy for people to hide. The war with Hanju was in a stalemate. On the other side, after receiving orders from the imperial court, the garrisons surrounded King Yu's fief and waited for the imperial court to send people over. Which minister does your majesty plan to send to Yuju? In the warm bedroom, Shen Yu took off his thick cloak and handed it to the servant beside him. He and Shang Junlin had just come in from the outside. Compared to the cold outside, the temperature inside the hall was a little higher. In consideration of Shen Yu's health, the fire in Yuzhong Palace burned more vigorously than in other palaces. Zun Jiao. Shang Junlin took off his coat and sat down beside the soft couch. Zun Jiao, Lord Zun, had made a great contribution in the Subei incident. After returning to the imperial court with Fang Jun, he took over Fang Jun's original position. Shang Junlin trusted him a lot, so he was the most suitable person to handle this matter. Lord Zun, you are a meticulous person. I think you will be able to handle the matters in Yuju well. The palace servants brought hot tea for the two of them. Shen Yu picked up a cup. After drinking it, his whole body warmed up. I originally wanted to send Fang Jun over, but there were too many things in the imperial court at the end of the year. Before I could say anything, I was stopped by the Prime Minister. Fang Jun had finally entered the cabinet. The Prime Minister didn't want him to be sent away again. There were so many things to be done in the imperial court. If Fang Jun went to handle the matters in Yuju, he would have to deal with all the big and small matters. The Prime Minister finally found someone who could handle the government affairs with him. Your Majesty, please don't make things difficult for him. Shen Yu chuckled. He and Fang Jun both recommended Zun Chao, and I did not object. Although he had made a great contribution to the matter of Subei, what he had done with those people in the middle was also an undeniable fact. There were always people in the imperial court who refused to let go of this point. Shang Junlin pulled the man's wrist and pulled him into his embrace. Your Majesty, don't you know what these officials are thinking? They just think that official Zun is blocking their way. They can find fault even if there's nothing wrong. It's good that he's going to Yuju this time to solve the matter there. If it can be solved perfectly, there won't be so many people in the imperial court who won't let go of his past. I think so too. The Prime Minister and Fang Jun must have considered this when they brought it up. After receiving the imperial edict, Zun Zhao didn't stay in the imperial court for long. He immediately brought people to Yuju. Other than Zun Zhao, Shang Junlin also sent a few officials to accompany him. Some were from aristocratic families and some were from poor families. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or not, but among these people, most of them were officials who went to Subei with Fang Jun. This trip wasn't completely safe. Although the king of Yuju wasn't in Yuju, he had stayed in his fief for so many years. It was inevitable that he left some backup plans. One of the reasons why Zun Zhao and the others went was to solve any hidden dangers that might appear. Your Majesty, there's a report from Subei. The Subei army has won a great victory. The northern desert has surrendered. Eunuch Meng walked in excitedly. Soon, the imperial court received the letter of surrender from the northern desert. That's great. God bless Dahuan. Although they had long known that the northern Su army would emerge victorious in this battle, receiving the news of victory was not the same as guessing. Before the dust settled, any accidents could happen. It was different now. The war with the northern desert was over. The result was set. There wouldn't be any more accidents. In the morning court, the officials were overjoyed. Ever since they learned that the king of Yuju had raised an army, they could finally relax. If the Subei army wasn't tied down by the northern desert, it would be extremely difficult for the king of Yuju to succeed. The next day, the People's newspaper reported about this. I knew the Subei army would win. That's great. They should beat the northern desert people. I heard that the northern desert people swore to show us who's boss. But in the end, they were beaten to the ground by the Subei army. They've been beaten before. Who gave them the confidence to beat the Subei army? Will the imperial court ask the northern desert people for compensation? Back then, the northern desert asked for the entire Subei. If you ask me, they should compensate us with a piece of land. It's not just the Subei army. They emptied half of the national treasury. If we ask for compensation, won't it be ungentlemanly? What's the point of being gentlemanly? Of course, the benefits are the most important. When they asked for compensation, they didn't say it was ungentlemanly. That's right, that's right. The imperial court was also debating about this matter. The northern desert had submitted a letter of surrender. That was all there was to it. Other than that, there was nothing else. We can't just let it go. The Prime Minister stood up. If we let it go this time, won't the northern desert think that it has nothing to do with us losing the war? They won't have to pay any price anyway. Won't they be able to invade the Subei army whenever they want in the future? Even if that's the case, we're a great country. We can't lower our price and ask for compensation. Why not? The Minister of Revenue glared at the speaker. Do you really think we won't lose anything if we win? Do you want me to list out everything one by one and show you how much we've spent on this war? After that, the Minister of Revenue began to read out the bill without waiting for the speaker's response. No matter the time, the consumption of war was huge. If it weren't for the new model of disaster relief this year, the Northern Desert People's Plan might have succeeded. The consumption of war was no less than that of disaster relief. If the national treasury was depleted in advance because of the disaster relief, this war could drag Dahuan's economy to death. After the Minister of Revenue finished reading, no one in the imperial court objected. Fang Jun also stood up. Even if it's for deterrence, we still need the other party to compensate. If they don't pay anything, the Northern Desert can invade whenever they want in the future. This is the only time they've felt pain. If they want to start a war again, they'll think twice. Lord Fang is right. Otherwise, won't people think that Dahuan is easy to bully? They can attack whenever they want. Even if we lose the war, we won't lose anything. The imperial court's opinion immediately shifted to the side of asking for compensation from the Northern Desert. Shang Junlin sat on the dragon throne. Seeing that they were almost done quarreling, he opened his mouth and said, "Minister of Revenue, calculate the losses this time first, and then discuss the specific compensation with the Prime Minister and a few other ministers." "I accept the decree." The Minister of Revenue cupped his hands. Next, they discussed the matter of rewards based on their contributions. Since they had won the battle, they should be promoted and rewarded. None of it should be left out. Shang Junlin had always been generous to his soldiers. He treated them well and rewarded them well. For example, this time, he directly promoted a young man who had just joined the Northern Desert Army and had won several beautiful battles. The ministers were used to Shang Junlin's generosity in this regard. No one stood up at this time to make him unhappy. After the court, Shang Junlin left a few ministers behind to discuss matters in the imperial study. "I think the grassland next to the Northern Desert is good. What do you think, Prime Minister?" The Prime Minister knew what he meant. "I also think it's good. Dahuan lacks a grassland like this." The other ministers also expressed their opinions. Seeing that the ministers understood his meaning, Shang Junlin was satisfied. "First, make a general plan of compensation and then show it to me." "I will obey." Because of the surrender of the Northern Desert, the imperial court was busy again. On the way out of the palace, the Prime Minister was once again glad that he had left Fang Jun behind. Otherwise, these things would be all on him. Now, at least he had Fang Jun to bear the burden. When Shang Junlin came out, it was drizzling outside. Eunuch Meng quickly came over with an umbrella. "Your Majesty, are you going directly to Yuzhong Palace?" "Yes." The palace servant brought a cloak. Shang Junlin put it on and stepped into the rain. Shunyu was painting. With just a few strokes, the man's figure fell on the paper. The sky was grey, the earth was scorched black, and the flames of war spread. Only the man stood with a sword. The flag fell and the flagpole was broken. Bright red blood splattered on it, becoming the only color in the painting. Shunyu painted the picture in his mind little by little. The man in the painting didn't show his face. He was wearing a black armor and a black iron mask. Shunyu lowered his head and used a very thin silver line to draw patterns on the mask. When Shang Junlin came in, he didn't let the palace servant report. Eunuch Meng stood outside the door with a cloak and an umbrella. He didn't follow him. Steady footsteps broke the silence in the room. Shunyu finished the last stroke and looked up. A man in a black imperial robe walked towards him and gradually merged with the man in armor in the painting. The blurry face under the mask instantly became clear. "What is you painting?" Shang Junlin walked over. "I'm painting, Your Majesty." Shunyu put the brush on the brush holder. Shang Junlin walked over and looked at Shunyu for a while. Then he looked at the painting. "Why is it me wearing a mask?" "Your Majesty, don't you think it's very mysterious and beautiful?" Shang Junlin said thoughtfully, "So you likes it like this. I'll ask someone to make the same mask for you." "Wearing a mask?" Shang Junlin walked slowly behind Shen Yu and whispered in his ear, "Will you be more excited?" You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.